Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the District Planning Committee. I am Kim Marr, the legal advisor to the committee. As apologies have been received from both the chairman and vice chairman of the committee, the first item of business is to elect a chairman for this meeting. Do I have a nomination for chair? Sorry, could you put the microphone on, please?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Pask.
And do I have a seconder?
Happy to second that.
Are there any other nominations before we go on to the vote? No, thank you. Okay. Yes, sorry, they haven't actually voted yet. Could we have a vote, please? Could everyone raise their hands, please? Sorry. And that is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Mrs. Marr. Welcome also to this meeting of the District Planning Committee. In addition to me and other members of the committee present are Councillors Phil Barnett, Graham Bridgman, Caroline Culver, Clive Hooker, Alan Macro, Jeff Mays, Richard Somner, Tony Vickers and Howard Wollaston. The following officers are in attendance to advise us and support the meeting. Bob Dre, the team leader, development control. Lydia Mather, the principal planning officer who will present the item. Viv Evans, our planning service lead. Brian Little, planning policy manager. Paul Goddard on Zoom, our highways development control team leader. Kim Marr, I've already mentioned, from Legal Services, and Stephen Chard from Democratic Services. And before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present in the meeting area. Representatives making a presentation to the committee have been encouraged to do so remotely by Zoom, but some are in attendance in person and they are equally welcome. And I will explain when I ask you to speak what the procedure will be. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting room to ensure that they have their microphones placed fairly close to in front of them and make sure they speak into it. Now, if we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by our trained officers who are present. Please follow any instructions given by those officers. The assembly point is in the Newbury Station multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring assistance to help them down the stairs will be assisted accordingly. Now, do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Right, and members, before I start the agenda with apologies, if I may say, please, of course, if you would raise your Zoom hand if you wish to make a point. I think the way, what I would also like to do from the chair before we start is ask if there is a proposal to allow speaking time for those wishing to present to be raised from the standard 5 minutes to 10. Does that find favour? I'm proposing that. Councillor Macro, are you seconding that for me? Can I have a show of hands, just physically, please? That's unanimous. So those wishing to speak will have up to 10 minutes. It is a maximum, not a target. But you will, of course, have the opportunity to have questions asked of you after you have spoken. So please remain at the dais. I will come back to you and explain. So without further ado, I will ask for apologies. Yes, Stephen.
Yes, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Alan Law, Councillor Dennis Bennyworth, Councillor Howard Wollaston is substituting for Councillor Bennyworth. Apologies also from Councillor Royce Longton, with Councillor Jeff Mays as substitute. And finally, apology from Councillor Ross McKinnon. Councillor Graham Bridgman is his substitute.
Thank you very much. We turn to item 2, which are the minutes. That's the minutes of the meeting of the District Planning Committee, of course, held on Wednesday, the 2nd of March, 2022. Members, are you happy if I sign these as a true and correct record? Councillor Vickers?
Yeah. I have a Zoom hand up. I have one minor and two, I think, fairly significant amendments to a request the committee to agree to. The minor one on page 15 of the papers, the first of 3 paragraphs which start with my name. About halfway down, it has WAPC. I think that was mishearing me. I was referring to Newbury Town Council. It's at the Newbury Town Council level where we are asked whether we approve or whether we support or oppose or have no comment. And that's what that paragraph's about. I'd just like that bit changed. The other 2 matters, for those of you that weren't there, but I can assure you, having listened to the minutes recording today, I did ask for something to be minuted, and the chairman agreed that it would be considered to be minuted. It isn't minuted, and I think it's significant in the light that these minutes could become part of a judicial review of the decision that they refer to, and I think it would be helpful if it was minuted. Would you like me to explain, Chairman, what it was that I said that isn't minuted and would like to be minuted?
I think, Councillor Vickers, that would be helpful. As you are aware, I was unable to attend that meeting. I think if you make your point, I will then ask for any advice, if any is needed, and then I will ask members to agree or not with you.
Quite. Thank you, Chairman. What I said at the end of the declarations of interest is I thought it might be helpful in the interest of transparency if Councillor Law, who's chairing the meeting and actually whose vote it ended up being the casting vote, would declare the fact that in a previous guise he had been the executive member that signed off the foreclosure of the lease on the football club at Faraday Road. And there being a link between those 2 sites, I thought that would be helpful to be minuted in the interest of transparency, not having any problem with him taking part in the meeting, as many of us have, past history as well on this matter. But I was told that would be considered, and I would like to know why it wasn't minuted, bearing in mind that there is now a judicial review.
Mrs. Mark, can you just assist us with any comment you wish to make? Now I will ask members.
The responsibility of the inclusion is at the discretion of the clerk. However, I think perhaps on this occasion we might wish to defer the approval of these minutes to address that. It's fairly significant.
Yes, thank you, Kim. Yeah, just in response to Councillor Vickers' query, I did ask the question of the monitoring officer about including it. Her advice is that it's for individual members to declare their interests rather than that being highlighted by another member of the committee. So that's really the advice. It's quite short and sweet, really, but from the monitoring officer, it is down to that individual member to declare an interest or not.
Thank you, Chairman. That is indeed true. I had an email exchange with the monitoring officer on the subject. It wasn't clear what the outcome was going to be, but that was the point she made, that it was not necessary to verbatim record everything made. I just felt that before we, go any further, in the interest of actually the ability of the council to defend a possible judicial review case, that it might be, worth doing.
Okay, your point is made and understood, Councillor Vickers. Thank you. I mean, I heard advice from my right saying potentially the best plan is to defer me signing these minutes and for them to be carried over to the next meeting.
I was not aware of the monitoring officer's advice, so the monitoring officer is essentially saying is that it's not for somebody else to make that declaration, and they have to make it themselves. So we certainly can't amend and approve. It's the chair's discretion, I think, to what you decide.
I think I'm going to defer signing these minutes, I think, in the interests of transparency all round. So,
okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, declarations of interest. Now, this application has, of course, been referred to the district. Beg your pardon, Councillor Bridgman, I do apologise.
I was simply going to ask officers why these minutes start at item 3.
Yeah, the reason being is that items 1 and 2 are from the go back to last May when there was the approval of appointing the chairman and vice chairman. The numbers run through.
It's that old chestnut, is it?
That's the one.
Right.
Are there any other points, members, before I go on to declarations of interest? I see no Zoom hands or any other physical hands. So, members, this application has been referred to the District Planning Committee, having previously been considered at the Eastern Area Planning Committee. And some of the members, like me, of that committee are also members of this committee. I would like to confirm, for the benefit of those watching this evening, that councillors are not precluded from being a member of this planning committee simply because they have considered the application previously in another forum, either at the Area Planning Committee or at a town or parish council meeting, provided they have come to this meeting to consider the application afresh and with an open mind. There are clear rules detailing the requirements for members to declare interests that they may have, and guidance as to the code of conduct in planning meetings, which are set out in the Council's Code of Conduct and the Code of Conduct for Planning, both of which are located at Part 13 of the Constitution. Now, are there any questions, first of all, members? I see no hands. I will declare that I, of course, was at the Eastern Area Planning Committee. I had been lobbied at that stage by all sides of those making representations. I took all views into account. I have not been lobbied this time. I also declared I was a member of BBOUT, who have been consulted and have been for very many years. So, members, do any of you have any other? Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was also at the Eastern Area Planning Committee where the previous decision was made. I've also been in contact more recently with one of the objectors, but I'm approaching this with an open mind, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Mays.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was at the Eastern Area Planning, and I'm a member of BOUT and the CPRE, which is the ruling, which are both mentioned in the agenda for tonight's meeting. But I will be using a free new position on the existing agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mays. Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, yes, I make the same declarations as I made last time as to lobbying prior to the Eastern Area meeting. I haven't been lobbied since, and I am predisposed but not predetermined on this application.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Same applies for me. I would also mention that I am portfolio holder for planning, which I think is relevant, and that I am a parish councillor for Holybrook, which is a neighbouring parish. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers.
Chairman, I'm not being lobbied on this item at all. I won't take offence at that. But what I do think I need to declare is that I'm a member of the Local Access Forum, which has a considerable interest in active travel and rights of way. And some of the points I may be making are about those aspects. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you. I think that's a pretty full house of declarations. Any others? Right, without further ado, I will ask Ms. Mather to introduce the report from a planning perspective. My intention then is to ask Paul Goddard from Highways to introduce his part of the report, obviously highways related. I then also have Brian Little from Planning Policy here, who will also elaborate on certain points. What I would normally say if this were Eastern Area Planning was, members, if you have any questions following any presentation, if you could please make a note of them, because they are very often answered by those members of the public or parish councils wishing to address us. But I think this is potentially a slightly lengthier process and a very important process to be absolutely correct on. So I will ask if there are any urgent questions after each presentation that members wish to ask for urgent clarification. If there are less urgent items, I leave that entirely at your discretion. If you could then make a note of them for questions at the end before we enter debate. Does that make sense to you? I'm getting one or two nods, so I hope it did. So without further ado then, Ms Mather, could you introduce your report, please, from a planning perspective?
Thank you, Chairman. Just attempt to share my screen. There we go. Okay, the application is hybrid, that is part outline for up to 165 dwellings on the western part of the site, a 450 square metre building proposed as a community hub, associated engineering works and with access to be considered. As part of the access works, the main access includes a section of single carriageway, replacement of the bollards to be located further north along Pinsent's Lane to prevent access beyond the site, a turning head beyond the bollards for refuse collection and other large vehicles, an emergency services only access point to be located where there is an existing farm vehicle access gate, and a cycleway alongside but separate from the existing and to be retained public right-of-way which runs east-west across the site. All other matters relating to the outline part of the application are reserved, that is landscaping, layout, scale and appearance. The proposal includes parameter plans that these would need to comply with at reserved matters. The full part of the application is for change of use of 8 hectares of the eastern part of the site for public parkland, proposed to be protected from development in perpetuity. The application is before committee due to ward member call-in, whether the recommendation is to approve or refuse, more than 10 letters of objection and more than 20 signatories to a petition. As a procedural matter, we have been notified that a request has been received by the Secretary of State to call in the application for their determination. The Secretary of State can call in applications if the resolution of committee is to grant planning permission. In that situation, officers would update the planning case unit prior to issuing a decision. The designations and constraints of the site. It is outside of a settlement boundary, but immediately adjacent to that of Tilehurst along its eastern boundary, which is the black line. The southern boundary is adjacent to the recreation ground and the designated retail and warehousing area, which includes Sainsbury's. The western boundary is adjacent to Turnham's Green Business Park and includes the access to the sites off Pinsent's Lane. The northern boundary is adjacent to Pinsent's Lane, with the AONB terminating to the northern side of that road and adjacent to fields which are outside of the AONB and the rear gardens of 7th Avenue. There is a public right-of-way through the east to west of the site and another to the eastern boundary, along with a claimed path through the site north to south, roughly from the back of 7th Avenue to a pedestrian access point from the recreation ground. The whole site and much of the surrounding area is within a biodiversity opportunity area. There are individual and group tree preservation orders on site. Off-site, that shows the biodiversity opportunity areas and the trees and the ancient woodland local wildlife site. The site is in an area of potential archaeological interest. Pinson's Manor Hotel near the access point is a listed building. There are potential mineral deposits on site and part of the site is at risk of flooding from surface water. With regard to the principle of development, the current adopted policies of ADPP 1 and 4 are spatial policies setting out the hierarchy of settlement and how development is to be distributed across the district. In particular, ADPP 4 relates to the eastern area. It states development will include implementation of existing commitments, infill development and site allocations. A broad location, shown as the hatched area on this plan, within the eastern urban area comprising Tilehurst, Calcott and Purley on Thames, and outside of settlement boundaries between the eastern area and Theale is identified in which to find sites for housing. The site falls within the part of the broad location, which includes land outside settlement boundaries. In terms of C1, policy C1 has a presumption in favour of new housing within settlement boundaries and a presumption against such development outside of them with a list of exceptions. There is therefore a presumption against this application under policy C1 where it is outside of a settlement boundary and the proposed development is not one of the listed exemptions. However, as the Eastern Area Planning Committee agenda report sets out, this circumstance is unusual. It is highly unlikely that another site within the broad location and outside of a settlement boundary will be acceptable where there are flood zones to the south, where housing development would need to pass a sequential test, and the protected employment area into which other policies direct commercial development and not housing. Officers consider that the site otherwise complies with the spatial strategy and CS1. It is immediately adjacent to a settlement boundary. It is in the broad location in which sites are to be identified for housing in the eastern area and thereby addresses an identified need. And being in the broad location is a type of land on which new homes are primarily to be developed on. Furthermore, where policy ADPP4 and CS1 include land outside settlement boundaries and ADPP1 allows for sites adjacent to settlement boundaries, officers consider, given the particular and unusual circumstances, less weight can be given to the conflict with policy C1 when the proposal otherwise complies with the council's spatial and housing policies. Turning to the details of the application. This is the illustrative master plan. It would not be an approved plan, but shows how 165 houses could be provided on site within the parameters of the other plans, and shows some of the strategy for the landscaping and rights of way of the proposed public parkland. It also shows the turning head and the location of the emergency only access point, which I will mark here. Turning head is there, and emergency access point is here. The development framework shows the woodland and tree planting, trees to be retained, open space, amenity grassland, pedestrian routes, public rights of way, development areas, primary access and sustainable drainage features. The land use parameter plan and the subsequent plans shown here would be need to be complied with at subsequent reserve matters. So this land use plan shows built areas, which are in orange, indicative location for the community building, which is the red star, landscape buffers and planting and open space. Development density shows the built areas to the south would be up to 40 dwellings per hectare, and the built area to the north would be up to 30 dwellings per hectare, which reflects the topography of the site and the higher ground levels to the north of the site. The building form and story height shows a no build zone. Self-model up here. Yeah, no build zone following advice from the council's landscape consultant, which is the hatched area. Development to the south of up to 3 stories in height. Development to the north of up to 2 stories in height, again to reflect the existing topography and more visually sensitive north part of the site. Development heights, which show the maximum ground levels for the development as a result of engineering works to provide suitable gradients and levels for the access and internal roads and built areas. The green infrastructure plan shows the corridor approximately 20 metres wide between the north and south development for the retained public right of way and proposed cycleway, which would run east-west of the site, landscape buffers around the built area and planting and retained trees across the site. The access and movement plan shows retained and proposed public rights of way, cycleway, main access, pedestrian access and emergency vehicle only access point. The ecology strategy, which again shows the type of landscaping, planting, grasses, scrub, hedgerows, sustainable drainage measures, ponds and a dog walking area with ornamental pond. It's the zoning plan for the ecology. The drainage strategy includes swales, attenuation pond and a rising main for surface water to move water to a collection point higher on site. The access drawings would be approved plans where it is a matter for consideration. I will leave these for the highways officer to discuss further, but in general, some works are required to remove an evergreen hedge and fence, which are over highway land to achieve the width of the access road shown, including a footpath alongside. The access would have a section which would be single carriageway. The existing bollards would be removed and new ones installed further north on Pinson's Lane, so vehicles cannot enter the site from the north of Pinson's Lane. A turning head for refuse and other larger vehicles is proposed beyond the bollards. An emergency vehicle only access point is proposed further north off Pinson's Lane, utilising an existing entrance gate. It is proposed that emergency services would have a master key and would only be used in exceptional circumstances. The main and other technical issues are as follows. The considerations found acceptable both to officers and the Eastern Area Planning Committee, which includes matters capable of being mitigated by condition or through Section 106 agreement, are aggregate extraction, archaeology, contaminated land, noise, water network capacity and drainage, the hub building, climate strategy, density and affordable housing, custom and self-build housing, trees, public open space, green infrastructure, including public rights of way, travel plan, biodiversity and landscape matters. The main agenda to the Eastern Area Planning Committee meeting sets out officers' position, including the benefits and adverse impacts, a recommendation for approval, subject to condition, heads of terms for a Section 106 legal agreement. The minutes of the Eastern Area Planning Committee meeting sets out the reasons for the resolution to refuse the application on 3 grounds. Where officers and Eastern Area Planning Committee differ is on 2 matters, policy C1 and highways access. Mr. Little will go through why the application is before you with regard to policy, and Mr. Goddard with regard to highways access. I will broadly outline the differences in the recommendation before you. Officers consider the conflict with policy C1 to be acceptable in this very specific instance, where the site is within a broad location, including areas outside settlement in which to find sites for housing, particularly where the development plan and its housing policies should be taken as a whole. And with regard to the highways matters, that the traffic data and modelling submitted with the application and the plans for the access to the site are considered acceptable. The recommendation before you is refusal following the resolution of the Eastern Area Planning Committee for the 3 reasons. That committee considered the conflict with policy C1 to be direct and not mitigated by the other housing policies, which is the first recommendation reason for refusal. With regard to highways, Eastern Area Planning Committee considered that access into and out of the site along Pinson's Lane for future residents of the proposed development to be unacceptable due to existing traffic issues experienced at times along Pinson's Lane. That is the second recommended refusal reason. And the third recommended refusal reason is the lack of a Section 106 planning obligation to secure matters including affordable housing, custom and self-build housing and other matters listed in the heads of terms of the main Eastern Area Planning Committee agenda. Thank you, Chairman. I can now hand over to Mr. Goddard if you...
Right, well, thank you, Ms Mather. Members, I did say urgent questions that spring to mind following that very comprehensive and full presentation. Am I seeing any? No. But if you do think of any, please make a note. We will, of course, be able to question officers before entering debate. So, Mr. Goddard, Highway Matters, please.
Good evening, Chairman, members. If I could turn you to page 35 of your main pack, that is the highway section of the main committee report that was presented to members of the Eastern Area Planning Committee. I'm going to take you through a bit about the proposal from a highways point of view. Your Eastern Area members would have heard pretty much of this, but Western Area members will not be so familiar. It has taken your highway officers some 3 years to assess this proposal, to get it to a position where we were able to recommend approval of the proposal on highways and traffic terms. What was pivotal in this was that the scheme was reduced from 265 dwellings to 165 dwellings. And that reduction by about 100 dwellings, according to the traffic modelling, made quite a difference. But I will talk about that a little bit later on. Lydia Mather explained quite a bit about the access arrangements into the site. The main access is from Pinson's Lane to the south. On the way into the access, there is a proposed pinch point, which the applicants have stated they have sufficient land in order to provide. There is a further pinch point further to the south, just to the north of IKEA. Your highway officers had no objection to the provision of an additional pinch point. We consider that said items would reduce vehicle speeds along this section of road. And it's particularly important, in my view, considering the number of pedestrians that walk along Pinson's Lane, cyclists, and also equestrians too. So we do support the provision of the pinch points, and I can confirm that the existing and proposed pinch points do comply with government guidance contained within the Manual for Streets. The layout before you is illustrative at this stage, so there isn't a great deal to say regarding the layout of the parking provision, etc. The big issue is traffic. On page 37 of your packs, there is details of the projected traffic generation for this proposal. One point worthy of note, which I will mention later on, is that those figures there, the overall traffic generation development, is probably quite high because it's been based on 100% privately owned dwellings, which won't be the case in the development, and also 11% of the development is apparently going to be retirement dwellings. So those figures will probably be lower than that, but they have been used for the purpose of the traffic modelling that has been undertaken. I would like to pass you to pages 80 of your main committee pack. This was the update report that was presented to the Eastern Area Planning Committee, and it gives details of the traffic modelling results. The traffic model used is a VISIM software model, which is an area-wide model, so it does allow for junctions to be modelled concurrently. And on those pages, you can see the extent of the traffic model in the area. The traffic model complies with all Department of Transport standards. And because of the sensitivity of this location, with regards to traffic levels and the retail facilities that are there, the level of objection that was raised on traffic grounds, your highway officers did have the traffic model independently checked and assessed by WSP consultants based in Southampton. If I may, I would just like to talk you through some of the figures there on pages 80, 81 and 82. And there's some columns of figures there. You've got journey time figures. That's the time it takes for vehicles to travel from different points within the traffic model. And there's also traffic queue lengths as well, mainly on the Pinson's Lane A4 junction there. You will note that they are maximum average figures. The model is ran on average about 10 times, and the highest level of traffic queues or journey time is taken on 10 occasions, and then it's averaged. Your highway officers would rather use these figures than a sort of lower average figures, considering the sensitivity of the location. The 5 columns there sort of give a bit of a story on the processes that we go through in using the traffic model. You will have 5 columns there. The first column, column A, is a 2019 base. So that is based on all the traffic surveys that were taken during 2018, and the checking processes that make sure that the model actually is a good reflection of what was observed during those surveys during 2018. We then go to a 2023 base when background traffic growth rates put forward by government are put in. And then we've got column C, which is when we add committed development, which would include the 200 house development to the south at Dorking Way, for instance. So that column C is important because that shows the network how as it would be on 2023 without the development. The columns D and E are with the development added, and you will see that the column D is with 265 dwellings, and you will see some of there's some quite significant increases there, particularly for the Pinson's Lane area with the traffic queue lengths, which made it unacceptable in our view. But for 165 dwellings, the increases were much less, and therefore on balance were found to be acceptable to us in highways. I think with those figures, again, there's other items that need to be considered once again. I mentioned the high trip rates earlier on, and the traffic surveys, they were taken in 2018. So they were obviously pre-COVID. Traffic levels currently are lower than what they were pre-COVID. It's a high quality, in our view, traffic model that was independently checked. And we have, of course, the reduction from 265 dwellings to 165 dwellings. If I may, I'll refer you back to the executive summary on page 7. What I've presented to you is what I presented at Eastern Area Planning Committee recently. The Eastern members were understandably concerned. This is a sensitive location with regards to traffic congestion, and that an objection was raised, reason for refusal. Members were concerned that residents from the development would have difficulty entering and leaving the site at times. I think there are 2 points in response to that. The traffic model indicates that the vast majority of times, being those maximum averages, that the highway network will work satisfactorily, and any impact from the development would not be severe. And we are aware that there are occasions throughout the year, due to the very big retail offers that there are there, IKEA, Sainsbury's, etc., when the network does get congested. And when that happens, it's always well publicised in the media, etc. But the number of occasions when it happens throughout the year is very limited, 5, 10 times. You know, if there was congestion there every weekend, the recommendation for you would be very, very different. And therefore, your highway officers continue to recommend approval of this planning application going forward. And that concludes my remarks, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Again, members, if there are any urgent questions you wish to ask at this stage, we will have another opportunity shortly. Councillor Macro.
Just bear with me while I turn back to page 80, because there's an anomaly that I've noticed in the output from the model that I've queried a couple of times before, and I haven't really had an answer that seems to account for it to me. So if on page 80, we look at the Pinsent's Lane from IKEA to A4 in the AM peak, it shows in 2019 a base of 90. If we go across to column D, that's gone down with the 265 homes to 71. And column E, which has got 165, so less traffic being generated, it's gone up. So I do not understand how we can have a situation where we've got a 90-second travel time in 2019. We build 165 homes and the travel time's gone down. And this is at the beginning of the journey. So we haven't got any kind of interplay with different junctions. I mean, there's 1 or 2 others as well, but this is the most significant.
A point I was going to raise later myself, Councillor Macro, but Mr. Goddard, can you assist, please?
I can, Chairman. Thank you for your question, Councillor Macro. With all traffic modelling results, when you add additional traffic onto the network, any congestion never increases uniformly. You will have locations where the congestion, the journey times, the queues will increase. Because traffic is held back in some locations, it can actually help in others. Because the traffic's held back, the traffic is more free to flow in other locations on the network. And we think that the figures from watching the videos of the model, we think that the reason why Pinsent's Lane from IKEA to A4, there's a reduction there, is because of the increases in traffic queues on the A4 as a result of the proposal. And because the delay in traffic coming from the A4, it actually helps on Pinson's Lane. That's my explanation to those figures. Thank you.
Thank you. We may probe you further on that, Mr. Goddard. Certainly something you just said triggered something in my mind, but I won't ask it now. Are members any other urgent questions, or can we move on to Mr. Little? Mr. Little, planning policy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. The Council is required to produce a local plan for the development of the local planning authority area. Recently, we held the Regulation 18 consultation on the local plan review, and they stated in that Tilehurst neighbourhood planning development plan would allocate land for housing, approximately 175. In the response to the Regulation 18 consultation, the neighbourhood planning group stated that they would not be allocating any sites in the NDP. The local plan, which covers a period up to 2037, needs to address development in the east, and there are currently no new sites proposed to be allocated during this period of the local plan. This will need to be addressed. Following the decision of Eastern Area Committee, it was decided by the Service Director that the implications of that decision met the criteria set out in the Constitution for referencing up to the District Committee, in such as this had wider implications for the local authority, the local planning authority, that is. Thank you.
Very succinct. Thank you, Mr. Little. Members, any, again, urgent questions? Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Little, did I hear you correctly? Because I think you said there were no new housing sites in the east in the local plan review, because the last time I looked at it, we still had the 2 sites in Thiel.
My understanding is that the sites that have been put forward as yet are sites carried forward from the housing site allocations DPD. I hope that is the case, and I hope I haven't given members, certainly have not decided on what sites in the east will go forward. The Healer, for example, rules out a lot of sites.
Those 2 sites in Thiel, the old sewage works and the White Hart Meadow, were not in the HSA DPD. They were dropped in between the what was previous. There wasn't a Healer then, but similar, and the DPD.
Well, Councillor Macro, I'm sure you will return to that point at a later stage in this meeting. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Brian, you made 2 references, which I'll just identify. Firstly, new local plan to 2037. And secondly, that it's not yet decided what sites will go forward in that new local plan coming out of the Healer. Can I just take you to the first part of the executive summary for tonight? This is 1.1 on page 7 of the written pack. And number 1 of 1.1, and if we ignore the first sentence about what is proposed and just look from the application site down to the end of that paragraph, is there anything in that wording that you disagree with about policy C1?
No.
Then can I then take you to the previous page under policy, where officers consider that there is limited conflict with policy C1. If this application site is outside a defined settlement boundary, isn't land that has been allocated for residential development under the HSA DPD, isn't an exception to policy C1, how is there limited conflict with C1? In my view, there's total conflict with C1.
All right, Mr. Little, please.
Thank you. Given the requirement in the east, and given the built-up nature around the site to the north and the south, and with a protected buffer of the ancient woodland, obviously to the east, that is why officers and I stress officers and not members, officers had reached the decision that there was limited conflict. Obviously, as we have done with every other local plan coming forward, if we were proposing a site on the edge of settlement, we would redraw the settlement boundary around it. In this instance, the Regulation 18 consultation said that the local neighbourhood development plan group would be doing that work in allocating sites. This was looking at it in terms of the planning application and balancing up all the issues around that, and that in terms of the entirety of the local plan. And in that respect, officers reached the conclusion that CS1, the core strategy policy, there was limited conflict with it at that time.
Just to take that a little further, you referred to Tilehurst having to take 175 houses, and I just want to confirm that that is a requirement in the new local plan, which council has yet to agree. And the current local plan takes us to 2026. So we've still got 4 years of the current local plan to run. And that this was not, and it's, I think, explicit in the pack, this was not a site that I know it was originally brought forward as part of the negotiation towards the HSA DPD, but it is not a site that appears in the HSA DPD, and therefore the conversation we're having about the 175 houses is all to do with the new local plan, not with the existing local plan.
Correct.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good answer. Very succinct again. Councillor Vickers.
Chairman, it's pursuing the same point that Councillor Bridgman has just raised, if I may. Could I ask Mr. Little to confirm that para 3.3 of the executive summary on page 10 of our report seems to make the key point on this issue, in that we are now 3 months on from the Eastern Area Planning Committee, probably less than 3 months away from the publication of Reg 19. Any appeal, should we refuse this, will take place when Reg 19 has been published and the new local plan has a modest amount of weight. Would you agree that that's a significant factor we should take into account?
Any appeal certainly at this stage would be at least 12 months hence, and the local plan timetable would say that we have published the local plan within that time.
Right, members, if that concludes any urgent questions, I will, of course, as always, let you ask more later. Right, now we have various groups wishing to speak to this application, starting with Councillor Clive Taylor and Miss Jackie Major from Tilehurst Parish Council, both of whom are in the meeting room with us. Welcome. Please, will you go to the dais? I think you're Councillor Clive Taylor.
Yes.
Welcome. There's a little button on the right of your microphone stand there at the bottom. If you press that, you found it, the red light is on. Now, you have up to 10 minutes to address us. Can I assist you with any timekeeping?
Perhaps you could let me know when I'm halfway through and then with 1 minute to go.
I will do that with pleasure. Your time starts when you... Well, can you just give me a second?
Yeah.
Sorry. Playing with the technology. Right, your time starts when you speak.
Good evening. I'm Clive Taylor, Vice Chairman of Tilehurst Parish Council. I know this site very well and walk across it several times a week, as many others do, using the public rights of way. But let me get straight to why Tilehurst Parish Council objects so strongly to this planning application. In planning law, the current development plan is the starting point for determination of planning applications. We are concerned that the officer report misinterprets planning policy. The site lies outside any planning boundary. Policy ADPP1 of the core strategy confirms that only appropriate limited development in the countryside will be allowed. Policy ADPP4 of the core strategy sets out the spatial strategy for the eastern area, identifying development will take place through existing commitments, infill, and allocations made through the plan-led process. Policy CS1 makes clear new homes will primarily be developed on suitable previously developed land or on allocated sites. The application is not an allocated site, neither is it previously developed or an infill site. As the site is outside the settlement boundary and in the open countryside, development is only acceptable in exceptional circumstances under policy C1. The site does not meet the exceptions listed. Development of the site is contrary to current planning policy and clearly should be refused. The broad area of the eastern part of the district, which is identified in the core strategy and referred to in the committee report, was a broad area of search within which sites would be shortlisted and then assessed for their suitability to be allocated through the plan-led process. It was never the case that this area was seen as an area where speculative applications would be considered acceptable. This can be confirmed by reading the core strategy inspector's report, paragraph 12, as well as paragraph 4.10 of the supporting text of ADPP4. The planning system is plan-led. Section 38 in bracket 6 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 requires that all planning applications must be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. The proposal remains contrary to the adopted development plan. The emerging development plan currently has no weight in the decision-making process and so should not be used in decision-making. No part of the emerging plan has been examined, so there is no certainty about the spatial strategy, housing numbers or site allocations. None of these have yet been confirmed as sound choices through independent examination. West Berkshire can currently demonstrate a robust 5-year housing land supply, and there is therefore no requirement to allow speculative planning applications. At the 2010 public inquiry, the Secretary of State, when refusing the then developer's last appeal, concluded that although the appeal proposal would provide a range of housing, including affordable units, plus facilities and services, it lies outside the current settlement boundary and within open countryside where policies of restraint apply and within which it would cause substantial harm. Now, I realise this is a revised application, but this fundamental point remains that it is outside the settlement boundary, and I would argue that development here would cause more harm than in 2010. We have had the COVID epidemic and the realization of the climate emergency that we all face. Our residents have come to increasingly appreciate the importance of our open and accessible green spaces, particularly those that are so close to where people live. This land is used by local people every day and at all times of the year. But during the recent lockdowns, its usage considerably increased as local people found it a place of wild beauty in which to exercise. I've already mentioned the settlement boundary, and during the past year, Tylehurst Parish Council was consulted by West Berkshire on some minor changes to that boundary, but no changes were proposed in relation to the land east of Pinson's Lane. So clearly, West Berks Council has considered that the boundary should stay in place. The latest reports from the planning officer appear to lay some responsibility for the housing position we're in on Tylehurst Parish Council for not having allocated sites as part of its emerging and still draft neighbourhood plan, and that there are few other areas with potential to build in Tylehurst. It is true that Tylehurst residents, when surveyed, were overwhelmingly against development of greenfield sites, but did indicate support for brownfield development. West Berks Council's now suspended local plan suggested 175 units should be allocated for Tylehurst Parish over the next 15 years. I would dispute that 175 is a reasonable figure, but let's look at possible alternatives to the 165 houses east of Pinson's Lane. All the examples I'm about to give are within Tylehurst Parish.
5 minutes.
Thank you. And would be brownfield or infill. 55 units, all affordable. at Pinson's Manor. A planning application has been submitted. There has been no objection from Tyrless Parish Council. This is a brownfield site. 44 units off New Lane Hill. They're identified in the current Healer. Calcutta Golf Course, who have held 3 meetings with Tyrless Parish councillors relating to potential housing and local green space in the last 6 months, and with further discussions expected. The current sale of the Calcutta Hotel on the A4 with the potential for redevelopment. 4 houses at the bottom of Langley Hill where planning has been approved, but it's yet to start. That is another brownfield site. There are empty and commercial units in the parish, some off Pinson's Lane, some have never been used, and which I would suggest could be redeveloped. In addition to this, there's the 85 units at the care home at Stoneham's Farm, where planning has been approved, but the build is yet to start. And there are 60 other houses at Stoneham's Farm where the build is in progress. So there are lots of approved build. There's a lot of approved build in progress or yet to start. Others that are awaiting planning permission. Others that are in the Healer. Others which may emerge over the next few years. And of course, much more that may emerge as redevelopment opportunities over the next 15 years. If just some of these happen, I would estimate that these numbers would add up to over 175. So I would put it to the committee that 175, if that figure was ever agreed, has every possibility of being met, possibly even exceeded, without building on the land east of Pinson's Lane. Can I add that as the existing DPD has 5 years to run, I would argue that this application, even having been stretched out over 3 years, remains premature. Tyrless Parish fully supports the decision of the Eastern Area Committee in relation to traffic and congestion caused at bank holidays and some weekends. The potential residents of this development would be landlocked at various times of the year, causing severe and unacceptable inconvenience. The single-lane pinch point entrance and exit from the site further raises the prospect of delay and potential safety issues. I would also point out that the emergency access from the north raises safety concerns due to the narrow, windy lane that is prone to water streams, freezes over in winter, and has very few passing places. With regard to the risk of costs at appeal, if this application is refused again, I would simply ask that councillors have confidence in the decision made by the Eastern Area Committee, which was unanimous. There were no abstentions, and even the committee chair asked that his opposition should be recorded. At least 2 councillors had stood down from that committee as they felt their views could be seen as predetermined. So the committee can show that it took this decision-making process very seriously indeed. I can't see any reason why this committee will not come to the same conclusion, and it would be perfectly right and proper to do so. And in so doing, it will in fact reduce the risk of costs, as the council will be shown to have allowed both its planning committees to consider this application. I would add too that West Berkshire Council declared a climate emergency some time ago. Surely we should be protecting a much loved and used green space that is also home to much wildlife, plant life, and many wild bird species. The land is a link between the ancient woodlands of Withy and Oliver's Copse and the AONB.
1 minute remaining.
Okay, I'm going to miss a section or two. I'd like to suggest that there are infrastructure issues relating to GP and school places. And finally, I would like to remind the committee of the huge volume of objections to this application. Over 3,000 letters of objection, a petition of over 1,000 signatures, Alok Sharma's survey of residents, which shows 70% opposed to development. Tyrless, Holybrook and Thill Parish Councils have all objected. Finally, I would urge you on behalf of the residents of Tyrless Parish to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Please stay there. I have 3 people wishing to ask you questions already. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. As I don't come from the Tilehurst area, I appreciate the points you made, which obviously show extensive local knowledge. Although I did go to the site visit, I didn't do a complete circuit of the boundary. I didn't have time for that, but I was struck by the narrowness, as you mentioned, of Pinson's Lane North. And looking at where the schools are, it would appear that any secondary school age pupils on this development will probably go up that lane to get to school. and possibly face a fire engine coming in the opposite direction. Would you agree that there are potential dangers there? That's one question, if I may, Chairman. Just a couple of others to help me, and maybe colleagues as well. You referred to the 2010 appeal. I haven't actually looked that one up, but wasn't it for a lot more homes? Could you recall roughly how many homes that was for? And the third question, again, is your local knowledge. Having seen the number of informal paths across the site, but also noting that Sainsbury's effectively will be the local shops for the developments, do you think there's a need for significant improvements to routes from the site were it to be approved towards the Sainsbury's area? Because it wasn't clear to me whether they were already regularly used. These are off-site routes that would connect very conveniently to the site and then on through to other parts of Tilehurst, and would reduce the amount of traffic if they were easy to use.
Right, there you go, Councillor Taylor.
Okay, I'll try and answer those. Okay, so yes, you're right. I mean, most of the secondary school age children on this at this site, should it go ahead, I imagine a large number of them would go to Little Heath School, and you're right, that would involve those students walking up Pinson's Hill. I don't want to suggest that there's going to be a fire engine coming down every day of the week, or even every week, or even every month, but on the occasion that might happen, and I dare say it would on very rare occasions, yes, it would, in my opinion, it would present a safety hazard. The number of homes, yes, I referred to the 2010 appeal, and yes, at that time, the number of houses I believe that were proposed were in the region of 750. On your third point, yes, there are lots of informal paths. You're right, there are public rights of way, east to west, north to south. There's a second north to south path that's, I think, likely to be approved certainly in due course. And you're right, there are lots of informal paths. Regarding, I'm very familiar with the paths that run from the western end down to the entrance into Sainsbury's. Those paths, you do eventually come to a concreted path behind Sainsbury's, but the access to that is not, can involve walking over broken fencing, mudded and very wet areas. And yes, I suspect, that those paths could do with some improvement. I'm not certain whether that lies within the developer's owned land or not, to be honest.
I will ask officers what could be done about them. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor, for coming along to speak to us this evening. I understand that Tilehurst have decided that they're not going to include housing allocation in their NDP, but you've just listed a number of locations that you think would be more suited than the Pinsent Lanes proposal. So why are those options that you outlined not going to be included in your NDP?
Okay, well, firstly, can I say the NDP is still under development. And you're right, at this moment in time, we are not proposing to allocate any sites, but we're probably at least a year away from this possibly going to referendum. We're still involved in discussions with West Berkshire Council. I think at the moment we're awaiting feedback on our current draft document, and I would admit that does not at this moment allocate sites. I would not completely rule out the possibility that we may allocate sites. I am a member of that committee as well as being a parish councillor. I'm not going to pretend I can speak on behalf of that committee here and now, but I would not rule out the possibility of some allocations.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Culver. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. You'll recall, Councillor Taylor, last time round, I made the point to you that Tilehurst were going to have to find 175, and if it wasn't here, it had to be somewhere. And we had that conversation, as it were. I just want to test you on a couple of the sites that you referred to in your numbers. You referred to the 60 houses at Stoneham's Farm and to the 85-bed care home. And just to confirm that both of those sites were in the HSA DPD. Yes. So, in fact, they are part of the current housing allocation, not the future.
No,
housing allocation.
I agree. That is right. And apologies if I was misleading. The reason I mentioned those is because in one case the build hasn't even started. But you're right. It would not form part of the 175 anyway. In another case, the build is, has been in progress for some time. I think it started probably about 18 months ago.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Turner, sorry, Taylor, is it? Taylor. Sorry about that. During the 10-minute presentation, you raised a wide range of different aspects of your concern regarding the proposed application that we're considering tonight. If I ask you specifically, what would you be suggesting as the main concern of the parish council? I know you gave a wide range of different views, different concerns, but what would be your main concern?
I think the main concern would be the value that the local community have with regards to this land as a public. It has public rights of way. It's privately owned, of course. There's public rights of way, and I think the use of that land has been of growing importance to the local community. And as I think I identified, there are other areas of Tilehurst. I mean, there's one immediately on the other side of the road at Pinson's Manor that could be, and there's a planning application into that one at the moment that could be developed. There are alternatives.
Right, thank you. I see no further hands up. So, Councillor Taylor, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next, we have from the adjacent parish council, Councillors Mary Bedwell and Claire Tull. One or both of you? So we can split the time for you. I can assist with timekeeping as I did before. Can I do so?
Yeah, I think it will be okay for time, but yes, I'll do overrun 5 minutes. Please let me know.
Okay, I'll tell you when 5 minutes is up, and
Thank you.
We'll take it from there.
Thank you. Chairman, officers, members, ladies and gentlemen, Holybrook Parish Council robustly challenge why this application to build on a greenfield site has been recommended by officers for approval. The site was never allocated by the DPD. There is presumption against development outside of settlement boundaries, and this development is not needed for the council to achieve its building target. The Prime Minister has pledged no more building on greenfield sites, and the Campaign to Protect Rural England have stated local authorities should delay making decisions until revised planning policy is issued. A climate emergency has been declared by West Berks, yet development upon development destroys nature and biodiversity and overloads our already oversaturated infrastructure. The Environmental Health Officer's comments regarding noise levels and World Health Organization levels is particularly damning, and that air conditioning will be needed in most of the houses because gardens will be too noisy to allow windows to be open in hot weather. How ridiculous is that? Members, can you explain why this can be acceptable? The loss and displacement deficit cannot and will not be regained. The reduction in the number of units has not altered the design of the access. We maintain that full and proper design of the access is not possible when so much of the development it is to serve is not designed and left in the nebulous world of reserved matters. We draw your attention to the actual width of the site entrance. This is intrinsic to the application and cannot be ignored. The site entrance must be measured accurately by highways officers. If proven to be smaller than the measurement on the plan, the response from the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service needs to be revisited and verified. The size of fire engines has not changed. RBFRS has stated to us that some specialist vehicles are larger and manoeuvres difficult through 2.75 metres, if possible at all. If a fire engine is too big, then how will bulldozers enter the site? Removal lorries, deliveries on pallet trucks, none of these will be able to service the site. It cannot be acceptable for emergency services to face additional challenges. The risk of fatalities due to restricted access is unacceptably high. Access from the north of the site does not address or mitigate this. Committee members, please note the access has not changed in size, shape or form. The Highways Officer originally deemed it unsuitable and recommended refusal. The Eastern Area Planning Committee has already established that the development is virtually landlocked. This, combined with the increased risk to responders and less than required width, cannot be acceptable to anybody. Whilst we are all mindful of officers' comments and close communication with developers prior to application, please, committee members, we urge you to support the Eastern Area Planning Committee's rejection and do what is right for the area and our residents and not be persuaded by the threat of an appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bedwell. Ms. Toll, you have about 6.5 minutes.
Okay, I will be less than that. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, chairman, members. We at Holybrook Parish scrutinise plans and proposals very carefully, especially in respect of design and function. In this case, there are so many conditions relating to reserve matters that officers have effectively designed the development for the applicant, which absolutely demonstrates that the proposal to build on this valuable greenfield site is biased and why officers are so keen for approval. An officer states that Reading Borough is unable to fulfil its house building target. We do not believe that this is the case. The Station Hill development alone will provide 1,300 homes plus a 200-bed hotel in 2023. Reading should be begging the Eastern area to help mitigate its carbon burden, not increase it. The strategic partnership should not influence this application. It's our vision, our needs that matter and should take precedence. When it comes to traffic, Pell and Frischman's modelling data always favours the developer. The reality, knowledge and experience of residents is consistently ignored. The Highways Officer admitted to us some 2 years ago, maybe more, that we have over 90% saturation levels on our roads. How much more are we to take and endure? Furthermore, the 71 pages of data that we do have is completely out of date and does not take into account the recent change of class from D1 to E for the community hub, which opens up the use to a much greater number of commercial and retail uses. The community hub itself is a great white elephant. No health or community organisation has expressed any interest. It is not and cannot be wholly sustainable by the proposed 165 dwellings. Deliveries, practitioners and users will have to come from elsewhere to make it viable. And as from the 1st of July, B&M, the bargain retailer, who sell anything and everything, have confirmed they will be open in the retail park. They are taking up the former Next store, which is next door to Sainsbury's. Independent traffic model review aside, the traffic modelling must be reassessed, especially with the high inflation and this store selling at rock bottom prices. The congestion and traffic backed up onto the M4, excuse me, on most weekends, not just occasional, and every bank holiday will become an everyday experience. And be assured that traffic is pretty much back to pre-COVID levels. Officers have recommended approval on balance. However, it is clearly out of balance. Members, you will not have failed to notice the extraordinary number of conditions for this whole site in order to achieve officers' recommendation on a site where no building should occur as it's outside the settlement boundary, and the call by the Prime Minister for no building on greenfield sites. To this, the question over the actual width of the access and accessibility by emergency services, the need to employ high energy use mechanics, which create more carbon, not reduce it. Is having to pump wastewater uphill really a good idea? The lack of up-to-date data and the detail and number of objections from ourselves and over 3,000 West Berkshire residents, the decision must be for refusal. We most strongly urge this committee to do what is right for the Eastern area. Reject this planning application as the Eastern Area Planning Committee did, because this proposed access and reserved matters application is not acceptable
and for this committee not to be deterred or intimidated by the threat of an appeal. The eastern area is full. Please save Pinson's Hill.
Thank you, both of you. Members, any questions for Holybrooke? Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a question for Councillor Tull. You mentioned B&M. Are you saying then, I think that's what you're saying, I hope you clarify this. You're saying that with B&M there being instead of next, that will increase the amount of traffic going through that junction at the bottom?
Hugely.
Thank you.
They are like a second IKEA.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Chairman, yes, it's a question for Ms. Tull. Again, drawing on local knowledge, you seem to feel that there's no possible need for a community centre. Does that mean that, for a housing estate of 165 homes, which seems to be fairly detached from Calcott and the rest of Tilehurst, there just wouldn't be sufficient reasons for the local residents, even in this sort of hybrid working environment that we now seem to be in, to want to get together? I don't know whether everything from older people's meetings to your mother and baby classes. Are there those sorts of facilities near enough to meet those sorts of needs, would you say?
Certainly, we are not implying that there's no need for community facilities. We're questioning the provision within this application because there's no provision for health facilities or an uptake by the local CCG or SEAL general practice. We are oversubscribed in this area for our those kind of facilities. And in this particular application, we see that the community hub may not be used as it's intended, and hence the reason for changing its class of use to open up to more commercial and retail use rather than community.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Macro, do you want to come back to us?
It was a legacy hand.
It was a legacy hand, right. Members, any other questions for Holybrooke? I see none. Lady, thank you.
Thank you.
We now have 4 objectors, one of whom is in the room, Miss Joan Laurie. Would you please go to the lectern? And could I please be advised when our 3 joining us on Zoom are in the room, please, so to speak?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Could I just pause you for a moment?
Yes, of course.
I'm just waiting. We've got 3 on Zoom to join you. When they're with us, I'll explain the procedure and ask you how you wish to split up your time.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Chairman, they're all part of the panel.
Excellent. So can I just confirm, please, that Mr. Simon Collard, are you there? We can't see you. And the MP, Mr. Alok Sharma, if you're there, and Miss Ailsa Claiborne. You appear to be in the room, but we can't see you. We can see Mr. Collard. I can see the Right Honourable Alok Sharma. Good evening. And Miss Claiborne, can you hear us?
I can.
Oh, okay. If you wish to remain in, we can see you now. That's wonderful.
That's better, isn't it?
You don't have 10 minutes each. You have 10 minutes to share between you, as I'm sure you remember from last time. It's up to you how you divide your time and who goes first. Logic says 2.5 minutes each, but one of you can have much more and the others less. How do you wish to play this?
Well, I think 2.5 minutes each, but unless our MP has a longer speech to give, he should obviously take precedence.
Let's ask him. Mr. Sharma, how long would you like to take?
Chair, I will do 2.5 minutes. I think everyone should have a fair share, so I will stick to 2.5 minutes.
Okay, well, shall we let him go first?
Yes, if we go in the order we did last time.
I will tell you when 2.5 minutes is up, Mr. Sharma. The time is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've been campaigning since 2008 to stop development on this strategic gap with local residents. They're represented here, and I want to pay particular tribute to John Laurie and, of course, many of the others of the combined Safe Pinsons Hill and Safe Calcott Action Group. As you've heard, there have been thousands of objections to this application. It was heard at Eastern Area Planning. It was rejected. I spoke against the planning application then, and indeed ahead of the Eastern Area Planning Committee, I had asked the Secretary of State to call this one in. Now, having come to the District Planning Committee, I've again had confirmation from the Secretary of State that should this application be approved by the Council, then the Secretary of State will consider whether call-in is appropriate. There's a certain element of Groundhog Day here, because I'm going to say what I said previously, which is the reasons for the objection remain the same as I gave previously. One of those key ones is that this is contrary to some of West Berkshire's own planning policies, as you've heard from other colleagues as well. The proposed development is outside the Tilehurst settlement boundary, and the current DPD still has a number of years left to run. We know that the revised National Planning Policy Framework continues to make clear the starting point for decisions is a development plan, meaning that this proposed development is premature. And of course, West Berkshire is able to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, which does not include the proposed Pinsons Hill site. As I said, the site also conforms to all the principles of a strategic gap. It is a haven for biodiversity and wildlife, and we've heard from your own officers as to the importance of this. It's worth pointing out that 5 applications have been rejected and 2 appeals have been rejected on this site since 1987, which would indicate this is not an area suitable for development. I very much agree with the submission from Holybook Parish Council in terms of the impact on local traffic, the pinch point, the safety issues, and therefore, based on all of these objections, I would request that you reject this planning application as the Eastern Area Planning Committee did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. I'm just going to pause the stopwatch. Mr. Collard, shall we let the ladies go first? Perhaps Miss Claiborne?
The only thing I would say, Councillor Pask, is I went last time and only had about 70 seconds. So hopefully I won't get 70 seconds this time.
So I'd be very tough on them then. Tell them 2.5 minutes exactly.
Yes, in 2.5 minutes.
or ladies, are you going to let Mr. Collard go next? Let him go next. Mr. Collard, I'm starting the clock again.
Right. Simon Collard, I'm a resident of the area. A number of points. Berkshire Fire and Rescue have objected twice to this application in the last 12 months, mainly because of the access requirements being unacceptable, and Building Regs 210, Section B5, Table 13.1 sets out the minimum requirements. 3.1 metres in a straight line is a minimum requirement. Pinsons Lane is certainly not a straight line. The fire service said it's imperative they gain access, and the proposal to use Pinsons Lane as a sole access may compromise their ability to gain access to the sites. The leasing of the building opposite Pinsons Manor, there is an empty office building. The applicant stated there would be a pinch point of 5.75 metres, including a 2-metre footpath and a 3.75 road width, which would require the removal of the laurels and potentially removal of that leased building. I spoke to the leasing agents on the 7th of April, Hicks Baker, who confirmed the applicant has a 5-year lease starting last year, and the actual owner of that building has no intention of demolishing it, so the proposed access can't be achieved without such a demolishment of the building. Also, as Vice Chair of Field Medical Centre, they currently have 10,900 patients. According to the Office of National Statistics, 2.4 people per dwelling. In my reckoning, there's 915 dwellings within a 1.25 mile radius of junction 12 of the M4. That would create another 2,200 patients and would result in 13,000 patients at Field Medical Centre. So that is 72% more than the national average for a general practice. School places, 915 dwellings at 0.8 of a pupil, how they get 0.8 is beyond me, according to the Office of National Statistics, equals 690 school-age children within a 1.25 mile radius of junction 12. Where are they going to be educated? Little Heath has got a waiting list. There are only 60 places available in schools within this radius, according to West Berks Council and the UK government education websites, and after I've spoken to each one of the schools within this radius.
5 minutes.
Sorry?
5 minutes up, 5 minutes remaining.
Right. And finally, the 106 delegation to the service. The 106 document itself, which is in draft, is virtually worthless because there's hardly any commitments in it whatsoever. And bear in mind, 106 is previously with the construction method statements seem to get signed and ignored without any enforcement from West Berks Council. As a consequence of which, I implore the learned officers of this meeting to refuse this application as a matter of protecting the interest of the affected residents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Collard. Ms. Claiborne, go. You got just
Thank
over
you very
2 minutes.
much. I'm a local bird watcher. I live near Pinson's Hill, and over the last year, I have been conducting frequent bird surveys to find out what's there, and the results have been stunning. Pinson's Hill is rich in biodiversity, outstandingly so in this part of West Berkshire. At least 6 species of red-listed birds of conservation concern breed there. And Town's ecological consultants even found it of district value for invertebrates breeding birds and local value for bats. TVERC, on the strength of one season's bird records, suggested nomination of the hill as a local wildlife site. Usually a minimum of 5 years data are required. It has the potential to be made even better by developing it for biodiversity. And this fulfills the council's and national policies. West Berks' admirable environment strategy states there's an increasing need for action to respond to the danger the climate emergency poses to our people, our wildlife and our environment. Will not building on Pinson's Hill allow them to address this danger? Yes. With the laudable aim of carbon neutrality, they'll use, and I'm quoting, local carbon sequestration, e.g. leaving big areas of grassland undeveloped and as part of local green space. Will not building on Pinson's Hill achieve carbon or help achieve carbon neutrality? Yes. One of their aims is to encourage more people to spend time in our green spaces to benefit their health and well-being. Will not building on Pinson's Hill benefit our health and well-being? Yes. The council's planning core strategy states habitats which support protected, rare or endangered species, remember those birds I mentioned, will be protected and enhanced. Will not building on Pinson's Hill protect endangered species? Yes. The National Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006 tasks the council to have regard to conserving biodiversity by enhancing a population or habitat.
Ms. Claiborne, if you were to conclude, it would allow Ms. Laurie the 2 minutes as well.
Okie dokes. Town's statement on ecology concludes that their proposal will have a positive impact on the habitats and species on the site. Think about this one. Can building 165 dwellings, roads, cycle paths, a pumping station and a community building of some kind possibly have a positive impact on the habitats and species of Pinson's Hill? No. Is refusing this application and developing Pinson's Hill for biodiversity going to have a positive impact on them? Right. Yes.
Ms. Laurie is going to be getting less than a minute in a minute.
I stopped.
Ms. Laurie.
You should have listened.
We did listen.
Right, I'll do away with the niceties, sorry. We fail to understand why this planning application was ever recommended for approval when it is totally against some of the national planning regulations and the council's own safe policies. The landscape value of the previous 5 planning applications and 2 appeals, the reasons for refusal and dismissal, which have not changed other than the increased traffic.
and the public interest and involvement, many of these considerations have been ignored. And these will be all the reasons that the Secretary of State would take into consideration if it goes to call-in. For instance, development should be plan-led, but by granting permission, it would actually undermine the plan-making process by predetermining decisions about the scale, location, or phasing of new development. The proposal remains contrary to the adopted development plan. A memo from the Policy Department actually stated that this development was against NPPF rules, and as the site is outside the settlement boundary and in the open countryside, development is only considered acceptable in exceptional circumstances. This site does not meet the exceptions listed in Policy C1. For the next 4 years, this land is still a gap, although it would appear that this designation could be withdrawn in the next DPD. However, this development should be judged on the current existing policies, not prematurely future DPDs. We could say that planning legislation will precede the new DPD, saying that there should be no development on greenfield sites.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to conclude. I've been quite generous in my timing, I promise you.
I have a point that Brian Little made the last time, that you have to help Reading sort their housing out. This was withdrawn last year. There is no need. And if I could quote the act that actually says it, I would be grateful.
Very quickly, and then Ryan must stop you.
Right. On the Commons Library Research Briefing, 27th of August 2021, the increase in the number of homes to be delivered is expected to be met by the cities and urban centres themselves, rather than the surrounding areas.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a number of people wishing to ask. Sorry, we have a number of councillors wishing to ask questions. If I could ask you, if it is specifically to one of those who has spoken, if you could name who you'd like to answer. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question or a point to be made to Mr. Collard. You referred in your presentation to pressure on services, and you made the specifics of doctor surgeries and education schools. I put it to you that any development anywhere will have some kind of pressure on services, and we won't build anything if we simply say, well, the schools can't take it, the doctors can't take it. What has to happen is that infrastructure has to be developed in order to accommodate any new building. So what do you respond to that, Mr. Collard?
Right, Mr. Collard.
Councillor Bridgman, that's very astute of you, and I concur with your comment. When I look at the surrounding areas, and I've totaled them up, that within the 1.25 mile radius of Junction 12, there are under development or under proposal 915 homes. The doctor's surgery in Thiel is already seriously oversubscribed. The school places, which I've run around all of the local schools within that radius, some have waiting lists, some have, well, a number have waiting lists. There is no place for them to go to school. So the infrastructure in regards to education can't cope. But we still seem to be putting lots of developments in the same area without any infrastructure or any extra services whatsoever. Hopefully that answers your question. If you want any further detail, I've got it all jotted down. So where I came up with the 915, I've got that, and it's probably more than 915 now.
Right, Councillor Bridgman, are you happy with that answer?
Well, we'll address it in debate, no doubt, Chairman.
No doubt. Councillor Macra, your video keeps going off, but you have a question for whom?
Thank you, Mr. It's for Mr. Collard. Mr. Collard, you mentioned strain on Thiel surgery. So there's a couple of things. How is it actually coping at the moment?
It's not. Is the honest, because I'm vice chairman of the patient participation group. They've lost 2 senior partners in the space of the last 2.5 years. They've only got 5.5 full-time GPs, and the national average is about 2,000 patients per GP. They're already well past that. stick them to 13,100 patients, that's 72 times more than the national average per GP surgery.
And can I,
45 weeks to get an appointment for a blood test or a call back from a GP.
Another question, Councillor Macro?
It's along the same lines.
Could you turn your video on? But I think those on Zoom.
I have a problem with my computer, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you.
Just I won't start the camera. Sorry. Is there any prospect of the old medical centre being able to expand in any way to cope with the extra load?
No, they've been trying to secure services of additional GPs. And for some unknown reason, as much as I love Theo, GPs don't seem to want to come, and they're getting better offers from other places. So they failed quite miserably. And they haven't got any money to spend either to expand the little surgery they've got down there anyhow.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Vickers.
Again, it's for Mr. Collard, and it's following on from Councillor Bridgman's question. I was going to ask you where the 915 dwellings come from, but we've answered that. The follow-up I would make is that, you know, I assume you're aware of what the community infrastructure levy's for, and I assume that you also know that schools and the GP service are supposed to get their share. They have to ask for, you know, have to calculate reasonably what they need for terms of expanding their facilities. But I also assume you know that the council is not responsible for actually delivering those services anymore, not even the schools in many cases. So I just wanted to check that, you know, when we come to the debate, and you may find your points are somewhat rejected, unfortunately, I sympathise with you, but I just wanted to check that you were aware of those points I've just made.
So not specifically a question then? Well, apart from...
I want it to be quite clear that the objective who's got some points to make, which I understand, is aware of the constraints we're under.
Mr. Collard, are you aware of the constraints Councillor Vickers has outlined to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely aware of the SIL payments that are made, and also aware that they can't dictate as to where they're being spent. So the fact that the surgeries and the schools may not get any additional funding is, I don't think it's a matter that can be ignored, actually.
No, I think, but it's very useful. We've got your MP listening to this.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a question for Mr. Sharma and a question for Ms. Claiborne, if I may. Mr. Sharma, thank you for joining us this evening. In our pack this evening, it says that the new methodology for judging how many houses we need means that Reading Borough Council is not going to be able to meet all of their need. So if we were not to build on Pinson's Hill, would you be confident that the area of your constituency, which is obviously partly Reading, partly West Berks, are you confident that that area will be able to provide enough housing without Pinson's Hill?
So, Councillor, I've not seen the documents that are in front of me.
We can't hear you, Mr. Sharma. Can you try to do something about the microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Well, you're very muffled, if I could use that term.
Well, I've done nothing to this computer since
that's better.
I last spoke. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Sorry. So just to say, Councillor Culver, I haven't seen the sort of detailed book that you may have in front of you, and obviously I'm not here to speak on behalf of Reading Borough Council. They're there to speak for themselves. I'm telling you, as the local MP for this area, my reasons why I'm objecting, and why we've had 3,000 plus local residents making the same objections. And at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, you know, what we should be looking at in determining this are the current policies that are in place locally and nationally, rather than projecting forward, as I think your officers are effectively suggesting, as to what may happen in the future with a future DPD.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharma. And Ms. Claiborne, thank you also for joining us this evening. I note that your a bird watcher, and thank you for your observations. It does say in the pack that we've got this evening that the area needs management. Currently, there's a lot of scrub there, and they've said it will turn into secondary woodland if there's no kind of management. What do you think should be done with this area? If you don't accept that the applicant can improve this and provide net gain of 10% biodiversity, what do you think would be a better option?
Well, I agree entirely. It should be managed, but as I say, I want to manage it for biodiversity. So one possibility is doing a sort of hay cut on the area that is mentioned, that you just referred to. There's a big open area of grassland on the eastern side where scrub is encroaching. But if we kept the scrub, well, I think if we manage the scrub carefully, because scrub is such a brilliant habitat, the central part of the site is mainly scrubland because it's just been left to rewild. I call it Bird City. That's where the linnets breed. That's where we've got a whitethroat, we've got dunnocks, wrens, robins, all sorts of things breeding. It's an absolutely brilliant habitat. So I would be happy for that to extend a little bit further east, but I would also like to manage the grassland so that, because it isn't just a monocrop, as it were, of one kind of grass. There's all kinds of grasses in there and a huge number of wildflowers. So with management, maybe with 2 cuts a year, as you would do with a hay meadow, I think we'd really encourage the seed stock of wildflowers to flourish. And we've got, there've been talks, comments before from the developers about maybe planting a wildflower meadow. Actually, we don't need to. With careful management, we've got one there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Any other members? Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you indeed for joining us. We now come to the ward member, Councillor Linden. Councillor Linden, you can either come.
You've got the agent.
I do apologise. Thank you for keeping on the straight and narrow, Mr. Dre. Mr. Bodkin, the agent. I apologise to you personally. Can I assist you with any timekeeping?
Yes, please do, Chairman. And no offence taken. We're all keen to get on to listen to Tony, I'm sure.
So can I give you, what, 5 minutes and a minute to go?
If you could give me a shout at 5 minutes.
I'll do that.
Brilliant.
Okay,
Thank you.
but please remain there for any questions.
I will. Good evening, Chairman, members, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you on the Eastern Area Planning Committee will be glad to know that I'm not going to repeat my speech from previously. I want to unpack a little of the decision facing you this evening. And we've heard several times already about the need for applications to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, as set out in planning law and the NPPF. So let's just unpack that a bit. Firstly, is our proposal in accordance with the existing development plan? Well, case law states that the decision maker has to consider compliance with the policies set out in the development plan when taken as a whole. The planning officer's report helpfully sets out their assessment that when taking the council's housing policies as a whole, there is a limited conflict with policy C1, that's from the HSA DPD, and no conflict with policy CS13 core strategy, from the core strategy of the NPPF. So just examining those elements a little further, again, the planning officer's report to the Eastern Area Planning Committee notes the accord with the key strategic policies of the core strategy, partly due to the site's location in that the site being in that broad location for development. So I believe, therefore, that our proposal accords with the key strategic housing policies of the core strategy. What about policy C1? Well, planning officers have already discussed the partial conflict this evening. And just a reminder that policy C1 is from the daughter document of the core strategy and therefore is an inherently weaker policy than core strategy policies in any event. But as Brian Little said earlier, if the site was to be allocated through the local plan, the settlement boundary would be adjusted in the normal way and there would be no conflict. And I just want to say a little bit more later on about the timing in advance of the local plan. Next, I'd like to consider the planning officer's remarks about the need for sites for 175 homes in Tilehurst and the absence of alternative suitable sites for housing in the area, as noted in the HELA. We heard already this evening, we've had some discussion about the Tilehurst neighbourhood development plan, first notified in 2015 and still, I think, at least a year away from consultation. So, really doubtful as to whether there'd be a turnaround, I think, and allocation of sites that way. So if we're compliant with the housing policies in the emerging plan, what about the wider policies in the development plan? Well, of course, the officer recommendation of approval indicates, I think, an implicit conclusion that the proposal demonstrates compliance with the development plan policies when taken as a whole. So unpacking on some of the technical themes, in landscape, we've carefully designed the proposal to meet the requirements of the landscape advisors through parameters, land use and height and other density parameters, with strong buffers and the use of boundary treatment to the development areas. Ecology, a reminder that there's no objection from the council ecologist or the Wildlife Trust, and a guarantee of 10% biodiversity net gain. I'll say a little bit more on that later. Highways, we've spoken quite a lot about already this evening. I've no need to point members to paragraph 111 of the MPPF, but that does state that refusal is only where there will be unacceptable impacts on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts would be severe. And as you've heard, we've worked with highway officers closely over several years to secure the strong recommendation that Mr. Goddard gave to the Eastern Area Planning Committee. So there can be said to be no conflict with the MPPF as suggested in the second reason for refusal set out from the Eastern Area Planning Committee. Just to pick up a couple of the detailed points already around the traffic modelling, yes, the existing mover software on the lights is the reason why it seems to do some counterintuitive results in relation to speeding up journey times through the network, and we can come back to that in questioning a little later on. So I have sensed a certain amount of disbelief amongst members and the public about the exact access arrangements. The ones that you have in front of you are a result of a detailed topographical survey on the ground and are consistent with government policy, manual for streets, and again, the Highways Department have raised no objection to our proposals. Just to confirm a matter that's already been raised, the landowners do have control of the landowner and promoter of this site have control of the existing commercial, the new commercial unit adjacent to the access point, which is on a lease with an option to buy and an agreed sum. So that can be exercised in the event of requiring the building. So in conclusion to this section, I believe that...
Sorry, just over 6 minutes gone.
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you. The proposal certainly accords with the existing development plan was taken as a whole, and I would suggest that the planning officers agree with this view either explicitly, as has stated in relation to housing policy, and also partly implicitly. Just want to say quickly a couple of words on prematurity, which was, as discussed at the Eastern Area Planning Committee, the bar is set high when it comes to prematurity under the planning system these days. The development is not so substantial as to threaten delivery of the plan as a whole, and the emerging plan is still is not at an advanced stage. We've heard several times about the lack of need, the existence of a 5-year housing land supply. on the achievement of the housing delivery targets of the borough, of the council in recent years. And a reminder that these are floor targets to be exceeded, not a quantum to be achieved and development to be shut down. So in the alternative world where this proposal is not in accordance with the development plan, what about those material considerations? Well, firstly, the delivery of 99 units in an area of market units in an area where the ratio of house prices to average wage is almost 11. Government figures are 22nd of March 2022. Delivery of 66 new affordable homes for local people to assist in meeting the shortfall of delivery, equating to 73 units per annum on the council's own figures. The delivery of equivalent of 7 months supply of self-build homes, the delivery of homes for older people, both market and affordable. The delivery of 22 acres in excess of 9 hectares of public parkland protected in perpetuity and managed according to council or local arrangements on that absolutely brilliant habitat that Ms. Claiborne described to you a little while ago. A guaranteed minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain measured across the whole site and confirmed through Section 106 agreement and current government guidance. The healthcare hub, which would be offered first to NHS and then to private healthcare providers and restricted to only suitable use classes under the new regime. An upgrade to some of the off-site public rights of way that one of the members has already mentioned earlier on. Climate change resilience and an adaptation strategy. So in summary, an extraordinary set of benefits and material considerations weighing in favour of the development. Finally, the third reason for refusal was in relation to a lack of suitable planning obligation is very much a technical ground, and we've already tabled heads of terms for a suitable agreement. So in summary, I think I've set out that the proposal demonstrates compliance with the policies of the development plan when taken as a whole, and furthermore demonstrated that there are a series of extraordinary material considerations weighing in favour of the proposals. And as decision makers this evening, all those relevant tests are met, and therefore the proposal should be approved without delay. Thank you.
And with 8 seconds remaining, I applaud your timekeeping, Mr. Bodkin. Well done. Councillor Culver.
Thank you very much for coming along this evening, Mr. Bodkin. You mentioned about the gap between average income and house prices. So if that is the case, why have you removed any one-bedroom houses from this proposal? Are you aware that we've got something called the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, which says that at least 15% of all homes ought to be one bed?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The housing mix that has been presented is entirely illustrative. This is an outline application, and the SHMA mix would be taken as a starting point at reserve matters stage. So it's not a firm proposal at all. It was just done for illustrative purposes based on market information at the time.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Bodkin, I take you to para 6.97 in our set of papers. I continue talking and you'll realise what I'm referring to. You made a comment about older people, and it's quite interesting. In the article, it's referring to older people in brackets 55. I've never expected 55 to be an older person. They were talking about perhaps a middle-aged or mature under the present climate. What I'd really like you to perhaps explain is what is the eligibility? Is it if it's a pair, two individuals, a partner and a spouse or a partner and somebody else, a pair, is it one of those needs to be 55, or is it a case of both will require to be 55 if it's a pair of two people in particular applying?
Councillor, as someone that despite my devastatingly youthful good looks falls within that category, I too share your concern that at the use of 55 as a threshold for old age. However, I would say that there is an ever burgeoning number of schemes to define this kind of these circumstances. It is quite conventional now. As a developer on a scheme elsewhere, we're working with an older person's co-housing group where they have taken the decision where one partner has to be over the threshold age. But this, I think this is very much, without being flippant, this is very much for determination at a later stage.
Right. Any other questions from members to Mr. Bodkin? Again, I see no more hands. Mr. Bodkin, thank you. Now it's the ward member's turn. We have apologies from one ward member, Councillor Joe Stewart. So we have Councillor Linden.
Chairman, can I have the 6 minutes and 1 minute at the end reminder, please?
You may indeed.
Right, I'll start. So again, apologies from Joe Stewart. So I'll first read her comments. Good evening, members. As you've heard from previous speakers who object to this application, this piece of land and the surrounding area are of extreme value to my residents and those in surrounding wards. The reasons for objection by the Eastern Area Planning Committee I believe to be sound reasons and raise specifically identifying where policy is being contravened. We often quote that we are proud to be a policy-led authority, so how can we decide when it suits us that we should go ahead and ignore these policies? In this case, specifically being policy C1 of the housing site allocations, DPD 2006 to 2026, as well as 5 policies of the West Berkshire Core Strategy 2006 to 2026 and the National Planning Policy Framework. My biggest concerns are not only for my residents already living in the area, but also those living in neighbouring wards and parishes who have no choice but to use the available infrastructure and road networks for living and working. And I am now additionally concerned for all new residents who may come to live in any proposed new development on Pinson's Hill. Our highways officers have concluded that traffic modelling shows impact on anyone using the road network in the area would be limited to possibly less than 10 times a year. And as they have no objections, presumably consider that to be acceptable. But if you live in that development and you're trying to get out for an appointment or to work and you cannot make that journey any other way than your car, then how acceptable will it be to be totally imprisoned in the estate where you live? Or maybe when trying to get home, having to park your car a mile away, perhaps, and walk or bus home until traffic abates and you can go back to retrieve your car. Is that really what we think is acceptable for a good standard of living in West Berkshire? And finally, of course, I understand that public money is used in the pursuit of planning applications and any subsequent appeal. And therefore, we have a duty to ensure any monies are spent with care and due consideration of that obligation. But I do not understand how we can decide how to bow to the pressure of a developer, especially when doing so would contravene our own planning policies simply because we are concerned we may lose. If we go down that route, we'll be at the mercy of any developer in future who will no doubt see West Berkshire Council as a soft touch. I would therefore urge this committee to heed the sound policy-based reasons made by Eastern Area Planning Committee and refuse this application. So I'll go on my points. I fully support on page 7 the reasons by Councillor Bridgman and Councillor Clive Taylor of the parish about the reasons for refusing the application on the local plan review, read the 165 houses. In terms of the appeal at the meeting, which I saw remotely, no officers mentioned the appeal at the end of the hearing when members suggested the application. That is normal if there is a worry from our officers that we could have appeal and potential costs. I just wanted to stress that point. So that's just going through the agendas. On page 27 from Transport Policy, they talk about people travelling on the 265 and 165 houses concerning pedestrians and cyclists on foot and cycle access. That may be appropriate to on the hill for fit and able residents, but quite a lot of residents who move in there may not be there. And also public transport will end at IKEA with the number 26 bus. Go on. In terms of ADPP4 on page 34, we've got a map on the East area broad location by developers, and that's got hatched in that area the Pinson's Lane outside the and within the retail park. This site has not been approved by the council. Officers may think there are suitable sites, but again, it has not been approved by the councillors. When I discussed this at the last meeting remotely, I also mentioned about the objection of the Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service being approved by the Chief Fire Officer and the Deputy Chief Fire Officer and the Chairman of the Fire Authority. That is in terms of the HQ, where officers will need to go down to the A4 and also potentially up the hill to the site. Thames Valley Police also said in times of heavy traffic flow, the response of emergency services would like to compromise and detriment to public safety. And then, of course, we've had the views of our local MP again, local objectives, three parishes, as well as 3 field parish councils. That's the 2. So I'm just going through my paperwork as such. But I wanted to stress those facts as well. So I'm just going through everything. So apologies for delay, because I'm just using the agenda. So the only other point I was going to raise was I did attend a Zoom, as I said, in Coventry. I know there's some problems on the minutes on the Wednesday, the 19th of agenda, and that's been later amended on this, Chairman. So I'm just checking my...
4 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yes, I think I've said my point. So, especially on page 24 on the objection. I know it had no objection first in terms of the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, which is still a valid major objection, Chairman. And also the requested third party on page 18 was in reference to our local MP, Alok Sharma. So that's it, Chairman. So I finished my comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Linden. And Councillor Vickers has a question for you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Linden, you're on the Fire Authority, I believe, as well as being a local ward member.
Correct.
So perhaps you could help us with this Fire Authority objection, which you say is still outstanding. I thought that had been cleared as regarded the traffic congestion, but what we haven't got an answer to is whether the problem of or whether the solution rather of an emergency access to the north of Pinson's Lane is a satisfactory solution. Do you know any more? And could you perhaps let us be clear whether the Fire Service HQ is also a sort of source for responder vehicles, or is it just an HQ for the sort of office staff of the Fire Service? Because I'm not clear whether it's the HQ that would suffer from any additional traffic, responses coming from there.
Yes. So, Councillor Vickers, if you look on page 24 of the pack, the comments on the 165 houses include the authorised fire safety inspector officer. As far as the below comments on 265 and 165 houses, which I'm referring to as the objection, the service headquarters is that site, which is the access point is in between when you get off by the car park, which is in my ward and Joe Stewart's ward, and IKEA. So IKEA is in Purley Parish. Not Purley Parish, it's in Tidmarsh and Sullen, but it's under the Purley councillors. So that is the problem on the egress in terms of operational fire staff who are based there. So the appliances would normally come from the Thiel Community Fire Station, but also other fire station equipment could arrive, including from Newbury and Whitley Lane in Reading as well. So there are other sites. So the D Rood estate is being disposed of as we speak, and it's only the school at the moment there, which is not that important. And of course, Pangbourne non-whole time fire station is shut. So it is our fire officers who are based there. So our chief fire officers there, our deputy chief fire officer here, and key fire control staff are based there. We also have the Thames Valley Fire Controls Service in that building as well, which not only covers Berkshire, but also Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire as well on that site. So that's where it is advised on there as well. So if you read that paragraph, that explains to you that it will pose an increased risk to responding officers as such. And also there is a department from Thames Valley Police who are also based there as well. And also the use of existing retail outlets. I don't think they knew about B&M there when they put that report. So they didn't actually put any comments on the proposed additional vehicle-only access further north of Pincers Lane. Is that clear, Councillor Vickers?
You're right. They didn't actually. There is no comment since we provided that alternative access. And what I want to know is, would that providing of an alternative access get around the problem of response times, which you're indicating will still on the whole have to come from the A4 via the Sainsbury's, IKEA, and go past the HQ. But the HQ itself is not a source of responder vehicles, except for perhaps some high commander vehicles going to a site to supervise things. Because I found nothing on the planning portal from the fire service since that second comment, which purely talks about, it's from the inspector people who talk about, reserving their right to comment on the fire service aspects of the built development, which is a different issue. So I wondered if you had any more information that you could help throw light on that matter, or maybe we could ask the officers.
Well, you could ask the officers, but as I made clear that this would be command and control. I mean, in terms of response from actual units, unless one was actually based for a short period of time at HQ, which is unlikely because obviously is the car parks in use and all the rest of it. But I would state it is that officers may need to go to that site from HQ rather than obviously response equipment, which, as I said, does come from elsewhere in the county. And also response equipment would come out of area as well, outside from neighbouring fire services as well, including AWE occasionally. So that may need to come out. So it is that command and control rather than operational vehicles in the main, because obviously we spread it around our fire stations, including our specialist equipment.
I think I've got the answer. Thank you, Councillor.
I think you have too. Right. Thank you. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify a little bit, Councillor Linden. Am I right in thinking that if there's a serious incident, then senior officers will need to go from HQ to attend that incident? And the concern is, as if there's heavy congestion in Pincers Lane, they may be delayed?
Correct. It would do, because time is vital, and we do have very quick response times. And in particular, in quite a lot of areas of the day, there is congestion, especially around if there's a problem, say, on the M4, and we've got to use the A4 as a local route, which has happened quite recently. And so that there are issues there which are higher than just a Visim traffic model as such. As such, and there could also be a fire if this development goes through. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the ward member? No. Right.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Linden. In that case, members, questions for officers, and specifically, if you could say which one you wish to address, I'd be most grateful. So I'm looking for hands. Councillor Vickers.
Just a couple to start with. One to Mr. Little and one to Mr. Goddard, I think. To Mr. Little, if we could hypothesize, because it is in the report that this is something we should consider. I referred to para 3.3 of the covering executive summary earlier. Am I right in thinking that if we were to go the other way and approve, and Mr. Sharma did refer it to Secretary of State, any decision that the Secretary of State might make would not incur costs, but it would incur delay? Is that my interpretation of the situation? We only pay costs if it's an appeal, and we're paying ours and the appellant's costs. And the question to Mr. Goddard.
Can we just ask Mr. Little?
Yeah. Okay.
I'll come
deal
straight
with that
back to you for Mr. Goddard's question.
I believe that is the case.
Good, simple answer.
Yes. Now, Mr. Goddard's question.
Yes. Just pursuing the issue of fire safety. If we haven't had an answer to from the fire service about whether they're happy now that we provided emergency access, I think the provision of an emergency access actually makes the site less safe for the reasons I brought out earlier, in that, there's the prospect of a rather large vehicle shooting down Pinson's Lane at high speed to respond to a fire when you've got pedestrians of all kinds, on a leisurely walk or heading to and from school. So can we, be assured that we need that emergency access, as well as being assured that the fire service are now happy with it? And if so, what it does for them, really, because it doesn't seem to help much in the responding.
Councillor Vickers, thank you for your questions here. This is always a somewhat difficult area, because the comments that we get from the Royal Berkshire and Fire and Rescue Service are always somewhat limited. They never comment on the physical arrangements of the site, the physical access arrangements, because they tend to be more involved at building control level. And so it does fall with regards to access design very much on your highway officers to decide what's right and what's wrong. And your highway officers, in addition, if I may, have some difficulty here, because with emergency access provision, we don't have any local policies on providing emergency accesses within any design guidance or anything like that at the moment, although we are working on some. And the government's manual for streets doesn't help very much either, because it doesn't specify X number of houses requires an emergency access. But nevertheless, with this proposal, an emergency access has been proposed, and your highway officers would have asked for one anyway, because I think it's a good thing to have from a safety point of view. Point I'm making is that if members are concerned about emergency access, is to be cautious about how defensible any position is at appeal. I know I've gone a sort of roundabout way of answering the question, but the responses that you've got from the Royal Berkshire Fire Rescue Service at the moment are as far as they're going to go. They have responded to the issue of congestion. And there, I think there's also one or two problems, because they certainly objected to the potential congestion for 265 dwellings. But their response that followed later on, when the scheme was reduced to 165 dwellings, was a little less clear. They just reiterated what they said before. And I'm concerned that they may have missed the point that the scheme was reduced to 165. I've said a lot there. I hope it answers some of your points.
Okay, you're smiling, Councillor Vickers. Can I go on to someone else? I will come back to you if you think of any more. Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Chairman. I come from the west, so I don't know this area particularly well. And unfortunately, I couldn't attend the site visit as I was only asked to be a substitute after it took place. But I did go along there on Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and it was seriously busy. Loads of people going in and out of IKEA. And I then drove up to have a look at the access point, and I'd really like some clarity or explanation, Mr. Goddard, as to exactly how that can be widened. Because to my point of view, as a layman, I accept, it's impossible.
Mr. Goddard, can you give a succinct answer to that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. The manual for streets states that for short distances, to enable access by emergency vehicles, obviously a fire appliance is the largest one, a width of 2.75 metres is required over a short distance. Overall, 3.75 metres is required, because then that gives enough room for a fire crew to operate round. The proposed access before you provides a pinch point that is 3.75 metres wide. And the applicant has informed us, because we asked a long time ago, have you got the land to actually deliver this, along with a 2 metre wide footway alongside? And from the plans that they submitted, they told us yes. And if an applicant says they have the land to achieve this, who am I then to sort of question it? But as far as pinch points are concerned, well, they're very common features with all housing developments, and I would take the view that this is no exception. Thank you.
All right. Okay, for now, Councillor Wollaston.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Councillor Culver.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've got 3 questions, if that's all right. Could I get some clarity about the number of dwellings that we think will be affected by the sound levels? I think it said something like 12 out of 22 areas that were tested would exceed the World Health Organization levels, but how does that actually translate into the number of homes that we think will be affected? Do you want me to ask the other 2 questions?
Well, no, let's take them one at a time. Who's going to try to answer that one?
It will be me, Chairman.
Miss May.
The only thing is I need to check the page on the report.
Do you have a question for someone else as well?
Yes. So thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
About the community building, it's going to be unused for quite a long time, it would seem, because the CCG have already said that they wouldn't want to use it. I mean, are we happy that we are wanting to approve an application where there's going to be a community building that could be empty for several years? And that there aren't, already thought of alternatives for what they could be used for, bearing in mind the CCG has already said no?
Sounds like one for Miss Mather as well.
May I do that one first?
Yes, please do.
So with the community hub in the section 106 heads of terms, it has a cascade mechanism in terms of who it's offered to first, and then it makes its way down until it would end up kind of effectively from a commercial point of view on the open market. So that's the mechanism to provide the community hub. And then in terms of the use class, it was put forward for class D1, and then the use class order has changed so that class D1 is part of class E, and then there is a condition restricting the uses within that recommended in the officer's report.
Can you assist with the first question? Have you found
sorry,
the page?
I'm looking for the...
or
Noise.
Councillor Culver, do you have a third question
Yes.
for another officer?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The other question was about the management of the parkland. Do we have any idea which organisation might end up managing that parkland? Because obviously this is going to be a long-term commitment. So are we happy that someone's going to come along and do that? Thank you.
That's Miss Mather as well,
Yeah,
I
that's
believe.
fine. Sorry.
I can make one up for Mr. Little.
No, it's fine. Again, it's captured in the section 106. The response that we had from the countryside team is that we might be interested in taking it on ourselves.
Okay. I can make one up for Mr. Little, actually, if that's all right.
Have you got the
Chairman?
Have you got the answer to the first question?
Yes, thank you. Oh, no, I haven't. Sorry. No. Okay.
I can ask someone else.
I've got another one for Mr. Goddard, just a simple one,
There
actually.
you go. I'll let you ask that, Councillor Vickers, given it's made the time.
When I was visiting the site, I went through those traffic lights where the people have to cross from the IKEA car park to IKEA. I presume I've never been in IKEA. But having let somebody cross, I was waiting for a light to tell me I could go, and it didn't come. So my general question is would it be something that we can condition through this application that all the traffic light arrangements on that whole route in could be paid for by the developer? Because I can see why you don't need the lights at the moment, because there's nowhere to go really up there much. So that's my simple question for Mr. Goddard.
Mr. Goddard, can you give an answer to that one?
I'll try, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Can I ask that you explain a little bit more your experience? This is the pedestrian crossing between the car park and the actual store at
The
IKEA.
very last set of lights you come to, which I assume is a sort of user-controlled lights, and it was very busy every time I've been up it there, and I've been there on walks where I parked in Pinson's Lane to start a walk. But this time I noticed, I stopped, the light went red, so I let a few people cross, and then I was sort of waiting for it to go green. Well, it didn't. Now, maybe that's a fault in the light, but I thought I eventually went because I assumed, well, if it's not red, then I can go.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. Difficulty sort of giving an answer to that, other than I could get it looked into to make sure that those signals are working correctly. Can you advise me the time of your visit?
If this is
Friday afternoon,
if this is reporting a fault, I think really that's outside the remit of this meeting. I
but
believe,
the general question,
historically there was meant to be a pedestrian bridge over there. There was a change of plan to the original IKEA application. This is from my memory, chairing that meeting umpteen years ago, whereby the bridge element, which would have negated the pedestrian crossing, was removed. I'm looking for someone to confirm that was the case. People are agreeing with me. As that bridge was removed, we end up with a pedestrian crossing, which is controlled by traffic lights. I don't really want to go into that anymore. If Councillor Vickers, you feel there's a problem, perhaps you could report it outside this meeting. Miss Mather, do you have an answer to Councillor Culver?
I do. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. So, yes, it says 12 out of 22 locations, but no, it doesn't. I haven't got the information on how many houses that would equate to. The point I would like to say, though, is that layout is a reserved matter. When I spoke to Environmental Health about the comments, it is possible with the final layout having to take the noise into account, that the orientation of the houses and the layout may minimise some of that, so not all of it's necessarily required. So the comments are based on the current layout and the noise assessment to date. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Chairman. A question for Mr. Goddard. And firstly, apologies if I'm straying a little bit out of the remit, but and perhaps the chairman will stop me if I am asking a question a little bit straying away. a lot of discussions have been centred around the traffic movements, congestion, and obviously access to the site. This footbridge, which is over the M4, the footbridge which comes from obviously the back of Thiel, going across to the back of the road in question, is that ever likely to become or could become a vehicle bridge at all, which could be considered if there was further applications? Perhaps again, like I said, Chairman, perhaps I'm straying, but it was just touching with the highways officer to sort of.
Well, perhaps if you are straying, Mr. Goddard will say so very briefly.
I can answer the question very quickly. The answer is no to your question. There's no proposals to do that. With the IKEA proposal, we did get some improvements to the bridge and to the approaches to make it better for cyclists. The parapets were raised, for instance, but no further improvements are scheduled.
Thank you. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a proposal to replace that bridge for something more suitable for cyclists, but not for vehicles. So it's a question for Mr. Little. When there's a big issue over this shortfall of houses in the Tilehurst area, I was wondering when it was calculated whether the 300 homes at the west end of Thiel called Lakeside was taken into consideration, because that certainly was taken out of the housing supply calculation some time ago.
My understanding there is it's a question of deliverability of that site. So I'll defer to Bob, Mr. Dre, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. The Lakeside site is not included in the 5-year housing land supply because of the delays in it coming forward for development, but it is a committed development in the HSA DPD. So they're two different things. So it is taken account of, it's part of the numbers of the current development plan.
Does that help?
No.
No. All right. Okay. Right. Thank you. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. And questions for Brian Little. First one is just to ask you to comment on, I referred you to the phrase limited conflict with C1 at the under policy on page 6 of the pack, sort of in the introduction. I take you to pages 34, 35, where at 6.15, the officer's report says that this is directly in conflict with C1 because it's outside settlement boundary and proposal is not a listed exception. So I just want you to comment on that contrast between limited and direct conflict.
It comes down to the balancing matter. As I previously said, you know, we would want plans to come forward in the local plan period. It was taken out of the Reg 18. It was left for the neighbourhood planning group to take forward. And it's in that round that the planning officers made that decision following the turning down by the neighbourhood planning group for allocating of the site in this broader area.
Thanks. Let me next reflect on the question and answer session that we had at Eastern Area, which is reflected in the minutes of Eastern Area. In particular, the top of page 98 of the pack, you and I had a conversation about the numbers in the current local plan and that had been delivered or were due to be delivered. And reference there to 280 dwellings forming part of the HSA DPD for this bit of the district. And my calculation that 333 dwellings had actually been brought forward or were on the table to be delivered. Now, you've referred us to a reason why ADPP4 should be preferred because of the removal of Pangbourne from the DPD, because it's AONB according to the inspector. I'm going to take you to policy HSA 21 of the DPD, which said, and this is the only reference I can find to Pangbourne in the DPD, and that is a delivery of 35 dwellings. Well, even if you add 35 to the 280 that were due to be brought forward, you end up with 315. And as I say, there's 333 already being delivered. So even if you bring Pangbourne into the picture, the HSA surely the HSA DPD number is being delivered. And indeed, last time we had the discussion about the housing number, you made quite rightly the point that West Berkshire currently has a housing land supply of about 7.1 years, and we are achieving 1.17 on, and I can't remember the precise rate, the housing delivery test. So I just ask you again to reflect on the delivery of the delivery of housing that is already taking place in this area compared to what was in the DPD.
Okay, thank you. The delivery to the core strategy and the HSA DPD to 2026 is as reported and is correctly as reported on page 98. What we're talking about here is the plan, local plan review going forward to 2037. It's the additionality. And it was that additionality that the service director turned around and said that was a district-wide matter, and that is why he has referred it up to tonight's committee.
Thank you for that. And finally, clearly you know that I preferred at the and as I say, I've come to this to have this debate and understand and seek to be persuaded by officers that I was wrong at EAPC, that I preferred policy C1 over the other bits of policy, because as has already been said, I think by Councillor Linden, we are proud of being a policy-led council. And I just want to understand whether you can recall any application that has been brought for housing outside a settlement boundary, which hasn't met any of the exceptions to C1 where officers have recommended approval.
Off the top of my head, North Newbury was a clear example whereby it was outside a settlement boundary, all the land north of Vodafone and to the west of that came clearly outside of the local plan because it was too late to be included in the local plan. The council had taken the strategy for Sandalford forward. Sandalford was not delivering, and therefore the exceptions, and it was not part of the exceptions test, but we were at danger of losing a 5-year land supply argument. And therefore, in that exceptional circumstances, we allowed, members allowed at committee to agree the application for North Newbury.
On a point of information, Chairman, I was at that meeting. Yes, it was approved, but only on appeal. It was refused by Western Area Planning, and that was one of the reasons why it was refused. It went to appeal, and we lost the appeal because we couldn't demonstrate the 5-year land supply, if I recall.
As Chairman, I entirely take Mr. Little's point that officers recommended. I fully understand that Western Area may have gone against officers' recommendation. I understand that position. And I take on board, but would you agree with me that there is a difference between that position at the time where you were in danger of losing on a 5-year housing land supply and this one where we have a 7.1-year housing land supply, so that test for officers doesn't arise?
I would agree with that. It is, again, like I said, it is the short-term versus the long-term issue.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Vickers, you have another question?
Yeah, this is my last question. Two questions on very different subjects, one of which I've already referred to in questions to other speakers, and that's the connecting routes to Sainsbury's, one of which I did walk when I was on the site, the one to the west of Sainsbury's, where I did see the informal, unsatisfactory cut through that people had been making. And then when I got home, I looked at the map and realised there was another possible route along the western edge of the recreation area where the developer is proposing to provide an access, but where there isn't currently a public right-of-way. Although when you look on the aerial photo on the GIS, on the online map, it looks as though there is a perfectly good route, but you can't see it all the way because of the trees. So I'm wondering if we are allowed, were we minded to approve this, if it's possible, since those routes are outside the control of the applicant, to make the applicant pay for the necessary dedication or provision of those routes. That's question one. I'm not sure which officer answers that.
Can we get an answer to that? Is that planning or highways, Ms. Mather?
Or it might be legal.
Or legal, or Mr. Goddard, or can someone try to give us an answer, please?
So it would be a section 106.
So it would be a negotiation to take place in that it hasn't been negotiated.
I just see an advantage in that it would enable more active travel because it is effectively the local shop. The other is about...
You have a second question.
Yes, it's about earthworks. I note that all the engineering works is part of the outline planning, and knowing that soil is precious, and that seeing North Newbury recently as one drives past it, the entire site has been stripped of topsoil for a long time. That completely destroys the soil structure, can't be good for biodiversity or ecology or indeed drainage, because so I'm wondering if there's any way one can condition the amount of engineering works that takes place so that it's limited to what is absolutely necessary.
Right. Who can assist with that one?
I can.
Oh, Ms. Mather.
Yes, so as part of the plans, there's an existing topographical survey, then there's a proposed ground levels, and then there's also the parameter plans regarding landform and build heights, and these all have the AOD figures on them. So, and they can be conditioned, and indeed there were conditions recommended on ground levels. So we can control the extent of works necessary to, and spoil, yes, there's a spoil condition as well.
Thank you.
How it works in practice. Councillor Hooker.
Chairman, a question, Mr. Goddard, following on from the topography changes and soil movements. In the construction plan and looking at the restriction of the road and the access in through IKEA, if anything's to be taken out, what route are you going to take that's not going to be a disruption to the shopping area?
Good question. I can't say I've given it a terrible amount of thought at the moment, but it would go out via Pinson's Lane. I would not want it going out via the north along City Road near Little Heath School, etc. I do think the best route would be via Pinson's Lane to the south. I do think, as is quite common with construction management plans, is that we can limit when deliveries take place. We can get deliveries to avoid peak travel periods, for instance, which would ensure that construction vehicles do not add to any construction during peak travel periods. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And follow up of that, there's stuff going out. We've now got to consider stuff coming in. 165 houses for materials. Is that coming in through IKEA route as well, please?
I would say that it is.
Thank you.
Well, I see no more hands up. I was waiting to see if I thought it was Councillor Macro would follow up on a question to Mr. Goddard. So I'm going to ask the last question. Page 80, Mr. Goddard. I'm a great fan of traffic management modelling. I remember you displayed traffic modelling through the A339 through Newbury and how impressive it was. I thought that'll never work, and it's worked even better. So yes, I believe in traffic modelling, but having spent all my professional life in the aviation industry, if something doesn't look right, invariably it isn't right. Page 80, the column C is the relevant one. 2023 plus growth, you've got, for example, some of the figures increase, but that one decreases from 88 to 74 when you add 165 houses. That is from IKEA towards the A4. You made a statement when Councillor Macro asked a question that the traffic delays on the A4 increase, but from IKEA to the A4 reduce. Well, yeah, sure, you can rejig traffic light timings, but there are winners, there are losers. But then, sorry, what really triggered me asking this question was that Mr. Bodkin made a comment, which I didn't pick up on to him, but I will to you, apart from that something about sensors on traffic lights would improve flow. Again, I've just made the comment in my layman's opinion. I am merely a layman, like most of us councillors here. So we do rely on our professional officers and those of consultants to guide us. But I'm just puzzled as to how adding 165 houses can reduce delays, reduce both in times and one or two in distance on page 81. Not all of them, but just some of them. Could you help me?
I will try and help you as much as I can. I would need to delve into this matter a lot more to provide definite answers of why the models behaved that way. I gave you one answer earlier on. Basically, if the traffic is delayed in one part of the network, that holds traffic back and that can help others. Mr. Bodkin, in his presentation, mentioned mover, microprocessor optimization vehicle activation. Okay, what is that in plain English? It's a software package that is installed at the traffic signal junction A4 Pinson's Lane, Dorking Way, that enables the junction within confined limits to think for itself, meaning that if there's a longer queue in one direction, it will increase the green time to help to clear it. And what I think also is happening is we're looking at the AM peak here. The traffic signals at A4 Pinson's Lane would be very much set up for the retail outlets that are there and the traffic that would come from them, IKEA, Dunelm, Sainsbury's. But during the AM peak, there's very little demand from those uses, which probably then, because we would adjust the signals when the development was put in, and that probably results in the big falls in journey time that you see there, because there's less retail traffic there. That would help compared to PM and Saturday peak. It is technical, it is complicated, but I hope I've perhaps given you, and I'm theorising a little bit, admittedly, because we would need to delve into it a lot deeper with the applicants' consultants and our consultants that check the model. But I hope that answers your question. And I would also add that we did have the traffic model checked by WSP independently for us, considering the sensitivity of the site.
Okay, right. Well, thank you. All right, members, I'd see no more questions. We've been going for, what is it, 2 hours, 40 minutes. Oh, sorry, Councillor Somner. Oh, you have got your hand up. I apologise.
Chairman, same tables. For me, please, and for clarity, and to Mr. Goddard again, in particular, Dorking Way. Dorking Way currently has 199 dwellings being developed out, and there's another site opposite, which I believe from memory last time was going to be in the region of 38. the last application that went in that was rejected actually reduced the number of dwellings, but it put in a pub restaurant. I just want clarity as to whether the numbers that we're looking at here include the current development, the other development which will be coming forward because it's in the DPD, and the current movement of that traffic, and depending on which way it goes, because it's either got to go further into the estate to come out, or it's got to come out of the estate at the Sainsbury's junction and it's got to go round junction 12 and back again. Just clarity, please, Chairman.
Chairman, thank you, Councillor Somley, for your question. I can confirm that the Dorking Way, the 199 dwellings, 200 dwellings, is included within those figures. From my recollection of assessing that planning application, the traffic and the direction it went, did it come towards the M4, did it go towards Reading, was about 50-50. The smaller housing development there, complete with the restaurant, I'm not entirely sure whether it was included without referring back to information, but I'm going to say that it was included because it's committed development. It's within the housing site allocations DPD, so it should have been included within the traffic modelling going forward for future years.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Okay, we've missed the opportunity to ask Mr. Collard, who lives there, but I think his suggestion would be that it's probably worse than that now on a regular basis.
Well, you can make that point in debate, Councillor Sommer, I'm sure. Right, members, I'm looking very carefully now. I see no more hands going up. Members, we've been going for nearly 2 3/4 hours. Are you happy to crack on with debate? Or I'm getting 1 or 2 nods. Should we keep going? Right. Who's going to kick off the debate? Councillor Hooker.
Chairman, firstly, I'd like to thank all the participants that have come along this evening and their contribution to this meeting, and everything they said has obviously, by myself certainly, and all the members I'm sure have been taken on board. Just for the interest of everybody watching and the members, I have read these papers in great detail. And I did attend the site meeting last week, which was excellently conducted by Miss Mather. And just for the interest of those thinking that one might come here predetermined for whatever reason, I can say that I've not watched the Zoom meeting of Eastern Area to be influenced in any way. But I will say from the outset that I am concerned, having received the papers, that I'm being drawn to a decision for potentially what may be perceived by my fellow committee members to be the wrong reason. And I'll be interested to listen to the full debate to convince me differently. I say this because much weight and emphasis has been put on the fact that a refusalist application by the committee will result in an appeal, and with that, the subsequent costs of defending that appeal. I'm conscious that the emphasis given in our papers by our development control manager has in fact set a precedent, as in my experience, it is more robust than I would otherwise expect in an application at this level. And it's for this reason it has focused my attention in a direction which is wider than purely one of our planning issues and planning policies. When I initially looked at the plans and layout of the application, I thought it a good, well thought out residential development, albeit in its outline state. And I was encouraged to see the large green parkland adjacent to the for recreational use. I know well the Junction 12 area off the M4, IKEA, and Sainsbury's, and the other businesses on that very busy retail park. However, it was not until I went to the site meeting and we went out onto Pinsit's Lane that I realised that there was only one way in and out of that development. And surprisingly, that exit point was only just over 5 metres wide, just enough, as we've heard, to take an emergency vehicle and justify that requirement. But for daily traffic movements, a single-way traffic system will be in place, requiring, as we were told on the site meeting, a give and take by drivers to get through. I was further surprised that when walking the site road down to IKEA to find, as we've been discussing today, that the traffic from this estate would have to negotiate a traffic-lighted zebra crossing for IKEA customers, crossing from their car park to the store, and then further down the road to the roundabout, more traffic lights before getting onto the A4 itself. I'd like to make it quite clear that I have much respect for our highways officers, and in particular, Mr. Goddard. But in this case, his computer traffic modelling exercise, in my opinion, resulting in the computer saying yes, suggests the computer hasn't applied and cannot be programmed for one element this committee can apply, one of common sense. This site will accommodate 165 houses, all hoping at daily peak times to leave and enter for work, for school runs and shopping through a one-way exit entrance system. This, I fear, at times will make smooth traffic flow untenable and road rage will inevitably ensue. Whilst at the site meeting, it was suggested by the agent that the developers had acquired the building on the right to the entrance. We've heard today that that is the case as a lease and an option to buy it. And you might consider, to alleviate these traffic problems and to assist their application, the developer may have considered realigning the boundary fence of that property or knocking down the building to enable widen that road onto that site. Going on to other issues, we pride ourselves in this council to be plan-led with respect to planning issues. This site has been in the headlines for over 40 years, has experienced many problems in 1977, in 1983, 1987, 1988, 1989. Applications for residential development have been submitted and refused. In 2009, a further development for 750 houses was applied for, refused, appealed, and then dismissed by the inspector. In our current local plan, this site was not put forward during the call for sites exercise and has not been submitted for consideration in the local plan currently being drafted. Therefore, this application is effectively a speculative development. This site is also outside of the settlement boundary. Due to a change of mind following the Regs 8 consultation by the Tilehurst Neighbourhood Area Steering Group, it informed the council it no longer wished to allocate land for housing as part of its DPD. This has increased the demand for housing sites in the east of our district, and our up to now plan-led policy, which has always been rigorous, appears to have now come under duress, and in this case to be forsaken, with a recommendation of approval by our officers. As members of this committee, we make our decisions on our policies and common sense, always taking note of local concerns. We are, however, lay planners, as the chairman's pointed out this evening, and must take heed of advice given to us by our planning and highways officers and development control manager. I'm conscious of the requirement for housing in this part of our district, but have serious concerns regarding traffic matters in this case. And for these reasons, and those I've mentioned earlier, I feel the outcome of this application could be unfavourable. However, I'm equally concerned that in the current climate of this government looking to drive up construction of houses wherever it can, and with the perceived pressure on inspectors to accommodate that requirement, I feel that the professional opinion suggested by our development control manager will come to fruition. That of, should this application go to appeal, the inspector may overturn a decision of refusal. I'm conscious of us possibly committing this council to exorbitant appeal costs, having had a strong indication in the advice given of what the outcome of this appeal would be. Hence me saying in my earlier thoughts, a decision being made for the wrong reasons. This may be right, but it may be inevitable. I look forward to the remainder of the debate to see if the feelings of the other members on this is in line with my thinking, as this is, Chairman, a most contentious application. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, that was a comprehensive start to the debate. Thank you, Councillor Hooker. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several concerns about this application, mainly revolving around highways and access. But we've heard from objectors, and also people who read the newspapers, local newspapers, will know that there are frequently long hold-ups along Princess Lane, particularly on bank holidays, wet Sundays and so on, with people accessing mainly IKEA, but also the other retail shops. And that's likely to be made worse when this B&M opens, because I think far more traffic will, or far more customers will go there than to the previous occupant of that part of the store. So the idea of putting another 38 vehicles per hour on that lane on a weekend, which is what, well, it's on a Saturday, but I suspect a Sunday is going to be similar. I think it's only going to make that situation worse. If there's an emergency on the site, you know, if there's a fire or somebody needs an ambulance and the fire engine or the ambulance can't get through IKEA and then has to divert all the way around via Tilehurst, which is going to add 10, 15 minutes to the journey. That's going to be appalling. If we have these emergency vehicles, as Councillor Vickers said, going up and down the upper part of Princess Lane with even with blues and twos on, but it's going to make things dangerous for anybody who's walking up or down that lane, it's doesn't bear thinking about, quite honestly. The local schools, the local secondary school, Little Heath, is at the top of the hill. One of the primary schools in the catchment is Springfield, which is also at the top. I don't see many parents expecting their children to walk up that hill, particularly in bad weather. One of my children went to that school. She refused point blank to go up that hill, and having pushed her bike up there myself, I didn't blame her, to be honest. She had to come down, but not to go up. So there's going to be far more traffic, and it's quite a long diversion around via Tilehurst. And that's going to put a lot more strain on the A4, on the traffic lights at Langley Hill, and so on. The traffic modelling, I still have severe doubts. I spent the last few years of my career developing and validating computer models, and if I saw numbers like that, then I would delve deeply into why you've got these anomalies. And I hear what Mr. Goddard says, but I still have my doubts. And if you've got doubts about one aspect of it, I think those doubts on the whole model. There's one other aspect of this congestion on Princess Lane. At the moment, if there's heavy congestion a weekend bank holiday, the main people are affected are customers of IKEA or Dunelm or perhaps Sainsbury's. But if this development goes ahead, we're going to have shift workers delayed, can't get to work. We're going to have people missing flights, people missing hospital appointments, because believe it or not, you can get a hospital appointment on bank holidays these days. And, so the effect is going to be far, far, far worse. One of the other assets, which I haven't really touched upon so far, is the surface water drainage. The proposal is that the water will drain down to this retention pond at the bottom of the site, and from there it will be pumped back up to the top. Though I know there are drainage people are concerned about that in terms of maintenance and access, but I'm also concerned that it's not sustainable. Spending a lot of money pumping water uphill for just to run down to another watercourse somewhere seems absolutely crazy to me. And also, of course, you've got the issue: what happens if there's a power cut? It could then end up presumably with flood water cascaded down Princess Lane into IKEA or wherever, Dunelm. So that's not a good thing at all. And finally, there's the issue of process. Normally, a site like this would have been proposed for the local plan. The local plan would have gone out to consultation, and local plans are consulted twice, regulation 18 and 19. So we had the regulation 18, was the last year consultation, the site wasn't there. If it had been put in the neighbourhood development plan, then it would have gone to referendum. So local residents would have had at least 2 opportunities to have their say on this before planning application ever was submitted. And they've missed that. And I think that's a great shame, Mr. Chairman. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Macro. Councillor Vickers.
Yes, Chairman. Well, this I come to this fresh, like Councillor Hooker, and I'm very grateful for his very comprehensive, prepared, balanced speech on the subject. So I won't repeat the points that he was making, and which I would only make in a rather more garbled way because I haven't prepared about it. I have read the papers twice. I had been to Pinson's Lane beforehand and looked over the fence where the emergency exit entrance is, and I thought, surely that can't be this housing site they're talking about. That was before I realised it was coming to District Planning Committee. So when I went back there for my own private site visit, because I couldn't attend the committee site visit as I hadn't yet tested negative for COVID until later that day, I looked at it very much, in detail, realising this was a highly contentious site. But when I actually looked at the plans, I thought, like Councillor Hooker did, actually, there's a lot of good here. But so I've gone from thinking couldn't possibly be approved, how can you have housing there, to saying, well, actually, this doesn't look as bad as I thought. And now, after the debate, I am really stuck on I'm really undecided. I think the Para 3.3, which I drew attention to right early on in the exec summary, is to me quite decisive, because whichever way this goes, the final decision is almost certainly going to take place after the Reg 19 is published, where the new local plan will have considerable weight. So in a sense, gaming this and trying to save the council some money with an expensive appeal, and that was why I asked Mr. Little whether there are any costs incurred in what process might happen should it be picked up by the planning, the case unit of Secretary of State. I'm going to fall probably on the side of recommending officers, supporting officers' recommendation, in which case I'd like to come back, Chairman, if I may, and talk about conditions, because they'll be extremely important if we do end up with an acceptance rather than a refusal. But my main issues are, just to outline them in this go at speaking, are that I'm satisfied by the argument that this is on balance in conformance with the local plan, so that the principle of development I'm happy with, because core strategy CS1 does talk about broad location. There are no broad locations within the settlement boundary. Sandalford in my ward was not within a settlement boundary until it was in the core strategy. So if this site comes through in the local plan, which we haven't yet seen, the Reg 19 version, and I know there are several changes to sites within that, then we'll be okay. Well, I say we'll be okay. There will be still a lot of people objecting, but we'll be definitely okay in terms of principle of development. So having, listened carefully to those arguments about the principle of development, I come down agreeing with officers there. So we're left with the highways reason for refusal. And there I am concerned about the whole situation with Pinson's Lane. I do agree that modelling does work, but it doesn't take full account of the behavioural patterns. It's all very well saying people can walk to school, but as Councillor Macro said, will they? We have to take account of what is realistically going to happen. I'm all in favour of people doing active travel. So I think we really do need to go the last mile with making sure that alternative methods of travel are as convenient as possible for all essential travel routes. Recreational travel is fine. You've got access to the wonderful Greenbelt area between the Eastern Urban Area and the AONB in the gap there, and that will be improved. And I think the ecological what we heard from the ecologist, I think that approving this will secure a decent management of a very significant area of beautiful open space, which can also meet wildlife considerations. So I think, it is a sustainable site. I wish people would use public transport, walk and cycle, what I feel about all of that. So I'm probably going to support, if there is a proposal to support officers' recommendations, I'll probably support it and just live in hope that the local plan, when it's published, will carry sufficient weight so that we can insist on the conditions, which we would then have to come back to before the end of the meeting, are met. But there are an awful lot of conditions that I think are going to be virtually impossible to meet. And I hope they're pre-start conditions, in which case the application won't happen because you won't be able to meet those pre-start conditions.
Well, an interesting view. Thank you very much, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Bridgman, let's continue with the debate and see what others think.
Thank you, Chairman. As I said at the outset of this meeting, I came here predetermined, but not predisposed, but not predetermined. I was fully prepared to be persuaded by officers that the views I expressed at Eastern Area Planning were wrong. And those views were, at that time, that we were a policy-led planning authority and we should follow policy, and that policy C1 should be preferred. It possibly won't surprise you that they haven't succeeded. There's reference to ADPP4, but I reflect that that is a policy of the current plan, and I say that I prefer the concept that we had, which was that we had an overarching strategy, and then there were bids for sites, and then there was the HSA DPD, and council considered at some length, and I remember the debate, what sites should come within the local plan and should be brought forward for development. And this wasn't one of them. If we accept that development that we haven't debated and hasn't gone to consultation and hasn't been through that mill should not be development that we adopt, then I say that this is a development of that type. I understand the argument that was put forward in respect of North Newbury, but as I said in my questioning with Brian Little, I fully understand that officers would come forward and say, look, we've got a problem. Because of Sandalford, we're in danger of not meeting our five-year housing land supply. And if we reject this application, they are likely to succeed on appeal on housing land supply. But things have changed. We now have a 7.1-year housing land supply. We have been robust in defending C1 at every opportunity. And apart from, to my mind, Furlands on the border of Sulhamstead and Burfield, we've won every appeal that has been brought against us on housing land supply. If we had adopted the new local plan, or if we were way down track with the new local plan, and it was yet to be implemented, and we'd had the debate about what sites should be in the new local plan, and council had had the opportunity to debate and decide what sites should be brought forward for development in a period which, let's not forget, the current local plan still has 4 years to run. If we were saying that for the period to 2037, this site was adopted by council for development, I'd have great sympathy with the argument on behalf of the developer, but that isn't the case. This site is not within the current local plan, and we've still got 4 years to go. I have regularly said that we should be proud to be a policy-led planning authority. I say this is against policy and we should reject officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
You stopped short of making a proposal, I take it.
I'm waiting to see what happens.
Well, okay, let's keep going. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with absolutely everything that Councillor Bridgman has just said, and was going to say a fair amount of that myself, so I won't repeat it. I'll just make a few other points. I think the issue around the noise, I'm really concerned about that, the fact that large parts of the sites are going to exceed the WHO, and I respect the fact the officer isn't able to give me precise figures on the number of houses, but I don't find it persuasive that we might be able to look at orientation of houses and things like that in order to overcome that problem. I think it's going to be too big a problem to overcome. I'm concerned about the northern route that's being proposed for emergency vehicles to come in. That lane is incredibly narrow. There are hardly any passing places along there, and I certainly would not want to encounter an emergency vehicle tearing down that hill in great haste. I'm concerned about the community building as well. Having debated the Compton Institute previously to this, I'm concerned that developers aren't giving sufficient thought to the purpose of community buildings. So they say that the CCG are not interested, which is a shame because, as we've heard this evening, there is a need for more GP provision there. But bearing in mind that they've said that they don't want that building, why are we saying we will have a building sitting there empty for 1, 2, 3 years? Why is there not more thought given to what that building could actually be used for? Pumping water uphill doesn't sound like a particularly good idea. I'm concerned about the impact that might have on flooding. It's not particularly environmentally friendly. We've been told that we might have to use aircon in some of the homes to overcome the noise. Again, that's not particularly environmentally friendly either. And just the final point that I want to make is about the housing. I'm conscious that the housing mix is a reserved matter, but once again, we're being given a planning application where there are no one-bed homes. And we are told that we need to accept these things because there's a need for housing. Yes, there is a need for housing, but there's a need for 1- and 2-bed homes. And whilst this has got 2 beds, it's got no 1-bed homes. It hasn't even, given regard to our strategic housing market assessment. There's even a document in here, I think by a company called Green Gauge, and they talk about the fact that there are 26% of homes in West Berkshire are 1-person homes. And we're saying we should have 15% of all homes should be 1-bed, and there are none in here. So, once again, I acknowledge that this is for reserved matters, but why time and time again are developers coming forward with these plans which don't contain any 1-beds and trying to say to us, oh, but you've got this need that you need to meet. Yes, there is a need, but your proposal is not meeting that need. So, as someone concerned about the environment, having looked at the site, I can understand that it's a great site from a sustainability and a rewilding perspective. And part of me thinks, well, maybe I should sacrifice my concerns about that in order to provide housing. But this application does not convince me of that because it is not meeting our housing need. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. I have 3 more members at the moment wishing to speak, mindful of the time, never wishing, of course, to foreshorten debate, but I'd be grateful if you would not reiterate points already made, but perhaps just quickly refer to them. Councillor Mays.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 points, but they are very brief. The first one is on the traffic data. I've gone through the data that's been presented to us. I'm quite happy with most of it, but I do not agree with the data for Pinson's Lane. I think what we're muddling up here is the actual traffic flow and the length of the queues in Pinson's Lane itself, not in the wider area that's been surveyed by the traffic counts that are mainly on the A4. So I think as far as the Pinson's Lane is concerned, there is a big problem, which is quantified by the length of the queues that are quoted. to be 35 to 45 at peak hours. That's cars in the queue. And on a Saturday, someone said earlier, possibly also a Sunday, there can be up to 70 cars in the queue waiting to get out onto the A4 at the Sainsbury's Centre. My other concern was on the drainage system, which Carolyn Cover mentioned. And my opinion there is that the site is not the Dead Sea in Jordan. It's not below sea level. The drainage from that area can quite easily or could go into the Kennet catchment without being repumped. So that's the second point I'd like to raise. And the third one, well, I think it's the third one. I've mentioned the three: the traffic data, the drainage option, and the emergency access from Pinson's Lane. Well, the emergency access, the point I was raising was that there is a gate shown on that northern part of the Pinson's Lane, which is the closed section from the south. But there isn't a road from the gate area onto the adopted road system within the actual housing area. There's no road shown from the gate. There's a gateway and there's a turning head, but nothing else.
Right. Well, thank you, Councillor Mays. Councillor Sommer.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm not going to dwell on a lot of the points that have been raised. I'm totally in agreement with the vast majority of them. I will extend my thanks, as I did before, to officers for the considerable amount of work that's been put into this case over many years, and I think we all need to be mindful of that. It's interesting what Councillor Mays has just raised, actually, because you don't queue on Pinson's Lane. You're right. When we've had bad traffic around that area, I've queued in Tidmarsh Lane. That's miles away, but that's how it works along that area. Only last week, Reading Borough were doing some work just over the boundary, and the queuing was the other side of Southgate. It snarls up along that road very, very quickly, and that's without what we've currently got. It's also without, as was mentioned earlier by Councillor Taylor, other developments that are coming forward. Brownfield, yes, in some cases, but there are a few fairly sizable developments that are coming forward. And I'll just relay something that happened to me a couple of weekends ago. So we were out doing a community litter pick, and I was the lucky one that got Pinson's Lane again. Sadly, it needed doing again. I nearly got mown down once. It was actually by a cyclist. It was by a cyclist that knew that there was nothing coming the other way, that expected nobody to be walking on it, and was pretty much freewheeling down the hill. But by Christ, they were moving. The other was by a small saloon car, a little hatchback, actually, smaller. And they weren't speeding in any way, shape or form. But for them and I to avoid collision, I climbed the bank. That's not a fire engine. It's not a refuse truck. It was a small car, and I had to climb the bank. If we're honestly saying that people will do, as Councillor Vickers quite rightly said, and we would like people to do, and use that lane to access that end of Tilehurst, then that is the route to do it. And I go back to what I said at Eastern Area. My concerns primarily around that element are the safety. It's the safety of the people that will be moving into that area, probably completely unaware of conversations that we've had and the fears that have been raised. I won't say hoping, I've come to this meeting tonight, as Councillor Bridgman said, prepared to be enlightened as to where we were from last time. I don't see anything that has changed my position from where we were last time, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sommer. Councillor Barnett.
Well, firstly, Chairman, are you looking for a proposal to extend this meeting after 10 o'clock?
I'll leave it 5 minutes, depending on how long you want to talk.
Okay, I've only got a few observations because clearly many points have already been made and I don't want to go over that ground again. But this is a typical example of an application where I feel very much in some difficulty in deciding which way to vote. Although obviously there's been several members' views either side of the argument. I feel that the big issues very much centre around the access to the site and obviously vehicle movements and build up and so forth. And furthermore, clearly it's another loss of another greenfield site, which you know, is so dear to the local people in the area. And I know my own experience is finding the loss of greenfield sites around Newbury and Greenham is a great concern to a lot of the local residents. Having said that, the evidence I think that's been put forward tonight clearly is very much reiterates a lot of the points which I read in the minutes of the earlier Eastern Area Planning Committee. And although, yes, again, I came here with a totally open mind, I do feel that there's a lot of issues that were raised then are very much in the forefront of members around the table tonight. And for that reason, even at this stage, after I think 5 or 6 speakers, I'm very much the belief that I'm going to have to still be very much in the middle of the road until the very, very last minute, until some proposals come forward. So I'll leave it at that, Chairman.
Thank you. I did see Councillor Bridgman's hand go up and then it came down again. Councillor Bridgman, did you withdraw your hand? Sorry?
Chairman, it was on the extension point that was...
Oh, well, go on. Do you want to make a proposal?
Yeah, I think you'll be into... I think we'll make it in time.
So.
But just in case, Chairman, I propose that we extend by half an hour if necessary.
Seconded. Are we all in agreement? Okay. But can we please focus? Councillor Wollaston.
I'll be very brief, Chairman. I came to this completely afresh and with an open mind, and I intentionally wanted to speak last and after I'd heard all of the debate. We clearly need housing, but my major concern remains traffic, generation and access. Common sense suggests this is going to be a major problem. It's a balanced decision for me, but I'm minded to vote against the proposal.
Well, I'm looking for a proposal. Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, I propose rejection of the application on the same basis, on precisely the same basis as was put to Eastern Area Planning Committee. I don't think I need to reiterate all of that. I think we had a proposal at Eastern Area which was debated at length and went through the mill in terms of the proposal that was then voted upon. So I propose rejection of the application, going against officer's recommendation on precisely the same basis as we debated at Eastern Area.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Councillor Culver's hand I saw first physically. Members, do I need any more debate or can I go to a vote?
Well, I'd like to propose an amendment to the proposal. I would like to remove the reason number 1 because I don't think that will stand up, but I'm happy to support a reason purely on highways grounds.
Chairman, I believe that reason number 1 is fundamental to my position. Reason number 1 being policy, you know, as I've made it very clear, but I'm happy to listen to officers.
Mr. Dre, do you wish to assist at this stage?
Just to clarify, is your proposal all 3 reasons for refusal? Policy, highway, section 106.
Well, if the 106, if I take officers' advice on the 3rd element, the 106 element, because that may have fallen away since the APC. But if officers are telling me it hasn't, then I would include it.
No, it's there to cover if in the event of appeal that we do the 106 then.
Indeed. So I would all 3 from my point of view.
We don't want to hear officers' advice on number 1, do we?
Very happy to take officer advice on number 1. I'm not going to.
We have to be absolutely careful. I think
we can rehear it. I think we have heard it. If you wish to rehear it,
we can't because of the proposal.
I won't be voting for the motion unless that is removed. I can tell you.
I'm sorry. Say again, Councillor Vickers.
I wouldn't be supporting the motion unless reason number 1 is removed.
Well, that's your choice as to how you vote. I've had a proposal which has been seconded. I'm advised by my officers that as that has happened, you cannot take further advice. Those in favour, please show. Would you please put your hands up in front of your Zoom cameras so we can see what you're doing?
What are we voting for?
Who said that? Right. We are voting Councillor Bridgman's proposal.
Right,
Can I
okay.
just clarify, Councillor Bridgman, you are saying, just repeat it again so we are crystal clear.
Chairman, thank you. I am proposing rejection of the application against officers' recommendation on the same three, for the same three reasons as were put to Eastern Area and are reflected in the minutes of the Eastern Area meeting.
I agree with you. Okay.
Right. I hope members now are clear. So the proposal is for refusal on those three reasons. Those in favour, please put your hands in front of your Zoom camera. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those against, please show. 2. The item is refused. Members, thank you. Members, please just remain until the system is shut.